Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to GrillingJR with the voice of professional wrestling, Mr. Jim Ross. And if you follow JR on social media and you're listening to this, so I certainly hope you do, you know that my man's been down for the count. He wasn't feeling well when he was at home in Oklahoma, went to the hospital, and wound up getting a bed with his name on it. So let's all collectively pull for JR and hope that he's feeling better sooner rather than later. Hey, if you can spare a prayer, boy, it sure would do wonders for our pal Jim. And while you're at it, throw Kevin Sullivan in your prayers too. These guys have had a rough go of it, and there's so much wrestling history between them. And I know the tribalism's a real thing, but I think we can all agree, boy, this internet wrestling community, it's a better place with guys like Jim Ross and Kevin Sullivan. So keep those guys in your prayers. We are going to be back at it with Jim next week, or at least that's the plan. Knock on wood. But what we're doing today is a bit of a remix. I can't believe this is real, but we just passed the 25-year anniversary of when we tragically lost Owen Hart. And JR and I have been doing this show for more than 5 years. And when we first discussed this, man, it was just heart-wrenching, you know, to think that it's been 25 years since that tragedy and we lost Owen. But I'm so thankful that since we first talked about this with JR and now so much has happened with Owen Hart and his legacy. You know, he had his first AEW figure. We announced the tournament. We've got the Owen Cup. They had those championship belts. And we just saw Martha just this past weekend announce that there's real stakes now with the Owen. And the winner of those tournaments are going to get title shots at the biggest pay-per-view of the year for AEW, All In Wembley. I just thought, given all the news about Owen Hart recently, maybe this episode was worth exploring. Now, we won't just be talking about Owen. Of course, we're going to be talking about the entire build for Over the Edge 99, what's going on with the show, and then the unbelievable responsibility, the duty that JR had to carry out to communicate to the audience what happened. It's a very different episode of GrillingJR, but with it being right here around the anniversary, I thought it was worthwhile for a revisit. We're hoping that JR is on the mend and we are back and good as new next week. Look forward to coming to you sooner rather than later with some brand new content from GrillingJR. In the meantime, if you just can't get enough JR, can I recommend his new book, Business is About to Pick Up? JR got me the advanced copy, I don't know, a few months ago, and I was delighted to have it, but it was worth another read. So I actually bought a copy on my Kindle so I could read it outside, and I just loved it. I highly recommend it. It is an easy read. If you've been on the fence about whether or not you should get it, you should. And you can also pick up a whole bunch of other JR stuff at jrsbbq.com. He's got something for everybody. Action figures, trading cards, all kinds of sauces. You know, you need some hot sauce? Got it. You need some barbecue sauce? Got two kinds of those. How about some cool ketchup or some cool mustard or the all-purpose seasoning? jrsbbq.com. If Jim was here, he'd tell you right now, it costs nothing to look. And look into this new book at Amazon or JR Book 50 or anywhere else where you enjoy books. I think you're going to like it. And I hope that you enjoy pretty challenging trip down memory lane. And it just felt like everything in the company was on fire and getting hotter by the day. And then tragedy befell us. What a day. Over the Edge 1999 is on deck here for JR, and we'll see you next week right here on GrillingJR. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to GrillingJR. And of course, the master of ceremonies is here, Mr. Jim Ross. What's going on, Jim? How are you?
The world is yours, Connie. The Podfather is with us, ladies and gents. And I was just telling Conrad before we started taping, folks, this really should be one hell of a show because it's much like last week in Beware of Dog, which is a whole lot more than just about a power outage in South Carolina. This show is very compelling for multiple reasons. And we'll get into those reasons as we travel this very unique journey that I had to live back in 1999.
Let's get to the matter at hand. It's Over the Edge 1999. Went down May 23rd, which is today, 20 years ago at the Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. And of course, most people remember this pay-per-view for being the most tragic night in the history of professional wrestling. We lost Owen Hart that night. And of course, we're going to tell Owen's story and we're going to get there. But to Jim's point, we want to just take a snapshot of what's going on in the World Wrestling Federation at the time and expand upon it. So, allow us a little bit of latitude here, and we'll get to the big show. But first, let's talk about what's going on in the company. Glenn Ruth wound up suing the Philadelphia Phillies for $10 million when a foul ball hit his wife in the left eye and she was legally blind. And I think most people know Glenn Ruth as one half of the Headbangers. This is a very unusual story. When did you guys hear about this, and what do you remember about it?
Well, it made the news, obviously, because there was a serious accident at an MLB game. So, Glenn was Thrasher, of course, in the Headbangers. Good hand, always a good hand, him and his partner. I think they're Jim Cornette creations, I think, but they did a good job. Nice tag team. But we heard about it after that, and then of course the concerns were how bad is his wife injured, and we find out later on that she had permanent damage in one of her eyes. It was just a terrible situation. That it's funny, man. You get attached to these dudes, and you find out you care for all these cats and their families, and then these things happen, like we're talking about this week, and it's very daunting. It's daunting to handle all the negativity and the catastrophe.
Let's talk about the other headbanger for a minute here. Meltzer would report that the Insane Clown Posse is claiming they're going to return to the WWF to second a new clown. And the new clown, of course, is the other headbanger, Charles Warrington. Chaz, I believe, is a name many people know him as. And,
or you can call him Chuck, Con, if you want to.
Okay. Well, let's talk about this clown persona, because this has been an idea that's been discussed for a little while and debated online. And I believe one of the original ideas was to even bring back Brother Love as part of this DK or Doink the Clown or whatever you guys were trying here. What was the idea, and why did we never see it?
Well, I think the verdict came back that nobody could get close to doing it as well as Matt Bourne. Matt Bourne was the greatest Doink of all time. Now, I don't know if he gets an award for that. This year's winner of the annual Doink Award, it's not that, but he was good at it. And I think, I mentioned this before in other shows, it's very, very challenging for any promoter, any booker, any administrator to try to recreate the same as has been before. I used a Sifi analogy one time. We were talking about Jimmy Snuka. Bill Watts trying to replace a junkyard dog with every jacked up African-American man he could find. It just doesn't normally work. And I think the persona of the evil clown, I thought was pretty cool. And Matt Bourne pulled it off better than anybody.
Let's talk about something that was not being pulled off to you guys' satisfaction, or at least it seems that way. Meltzer would report around this time that Dory Funk was released from his role as training camp instructor with the idea that you guys are going to move the camp to Louisville, where it'll be under the supervision of Jim Cornette and Danny Davis. And there's a lot of talent in there. And one name really sticks out. Mr. Mark Henry was going to be there. Chat me up about why it didn't work out with the Funkin' Dojo. And instead you guys chose to do OVW.
Well, I want to say that Dory Funk Jr. was a huge contributor to the training of a lot of big-time talents. I mean, he trained a lot of Hall of Fame guys. He was amazing. But, Dory was not a young pup like me right now, but he didn't, they had to commute to Stanford. He and his wife, Marty had to travel with him. And we were using the warehouse facility at WWE Television, which wasn't built for the wrestling training. They had, it's a television studio. So it just was the fit. We outgrew the fit of where we were facility wise. And we wanted to be able to have a developmental territory that could produce its own television show locally and that could run live events, because the only way a talent's going to get better is that they work in front of a paying live audience with someone better than they. And so that was kind of the idea. We eventually used the OVW model to open up one in Memphis and in Cincinnati. Les Thatcher did a good job for us in Cincinnati too. So we had 3 territories. And so from that one little warehouse thing, we migrated to the three territories, and it ended up being, now the Performance Center's the big dog, but that was where it started. The Performance Center concept in Louisville, Memphis, and in Cincinnati.
I want to talk to you a little bit about an article that ran in Forbes magazine where it talked about how wrestling is booming, but wrestler pay is not. And the gist is 15% of the revenue, according to their study, however they got their information, is what goes to the talent. And they think that pales into comparison to other forms of media. And they would say that most wrestlers are earning an average salary of between 80 to 200,000. And they even talked to Ken Patera, who said that at his peak, he grossed 140 grand. But after all the expenses for travel and medical and legal, he was left with 42,000. When you see an article like this in the mainstream, especially when they say, and this really stuck out to me, Steve Austin, despite being the top draw for the WWF and making more than $5 million last year, has roughly the same control over his career as Homer Simpson. So when you see an article like this in the mainstream, if you're in the office, you got to worry, oh shit, the boys are going to see this and my phone's going to ring. Am I right?
Yeah, it happens. Anything that, Conrad, the wrestling talent, I've invested my entire life in this business. I don't want a pat on the back or a attaboy. I've loved every minute of it. It's my dream gig being in the wrestling business for all these years. But the one thing I got to say, and I'm sure to some extent, whether you're an NFL player or a soap opera star or a singer, anybody that has to cater to a live audience and keep refining their act, and sometimes when the pay is a little untraditional, which it is oftentimes in that world, because these guys are independent contractors. They're paying their taxes via 1099 form. They have to pay their taxes every quarter, and which is unusual from being a regular employee. So I think that I remember, gosh, all those years doing payroll, I think we worked on around somewhere between 30 and 33% of the gross after taxes is what we call a talent pool. Then once you get into that pool of money from that 30 or 33%, as it was over the years, it wasn't that much for pay-per-view. It was a different formula. But there's a lot more money to cut up, bigger pie. That the idea of that 11% or where the hell it was is inaccurate. And so, but it stirred the talent up, and talent was going to say they're kind of skittish by nature when it comes to that. And you know why? Because they're not good money managers, and they know that they're pooping in the bed, and it's not smart. And again, I'll use this overstated analogy. How many Rolexes do you really need? So guys aren't good money managers. So they didn't want the gift horse to walk off the farm. And so they were all, anytime you talk about money, everybody got paranoid because they weren't prepared to be without any monies or less monies or to start over, nothing. It was a sad thing. And it was like a dog chasing its tail around and around. And you went, and no matter how hard you talk to talent, thoroughly, heartfelt, you got to save some money and get ready, and you got to pay your taxes. I mean, I've had conversations with the IRS when I was there at WWE, and where a guy would, they said, we're going to have to garnish so-and-so's wages. And he hadn't filed his taxes in 2 years, sometimes, that kind of crazy shit. So I say, I look, the guy's doing all right. He made $1 million last year. Didn't pay any taxes. So you're making $19K a week and change, and you can't find your way to pay taxes. I'm sorry. At some point, even as the father figure, you try to be everybody's Uncle JR or whatever. You say, what the hell why am I so upset about this for somebody being so damned ignorant? And that's kind of where we are. That's the deal there. Yeah. Any indication that, whether it be from Meltzer or Wade Keller or anybody else regarding the payoffs, stirred the pot in the locker room every time.
What do you think of their rough guess that it's 15%? Is that about right? What was the formula that you used when you were trying to sort of divvy up pay for the boys?
they got 33. The 33% was the monies. If you do $100,000 house, real simple math here, the after tax figure would be somewhere around $33,000. 30% of 100 grand is 30 grand. Let's use a higher number, 33%, 33K. Now you got 33,000 to play with. You put your card on paper, all the matches in the order of their importance, and the referees, and the managers, and the agents, and out of that money is what they got paid on. Now WWE may use a different formula now. I'm sure they probably do because the revenues are much higher. They got more disposable cash to fund the talent payroll, but that's what it was then. So 33K. Then that's where it comes into the little peeing contest of it's discretionary money. Now what that means is it's up to the decision maker that's doing the payroll to determine how much of the $33,000 pool that you're going to get. And there's always that rub because there wasn't formulaic. It wasn't something they could just hit their computer or their phone and add up what they're going to make. Everybody knew what they're going to make every night. Now, when I first got in the wrestling business, I got paid in cash nightly. Not a smart deal either, but I got paid in cash nightly, and I don't know if I even paid taxes in the 70s. Hell, I don't remember, but nonetheless, it was a smart deal. I mean, JR's no longer doing the show. Conrad is a partner. Just got indicted. We think he's going to Leavenworth, though. Or maybe he's going to go to one of those nice country club prisons. But that's how it was. That was I remember one time in Fort Smith, I got paid in hot dogs. And listen to this. This asshole promoter, Leonard Clay, what is a con man? You couldn't help but like the son of a bitch. He kind of reminds you of Uncle Joe on what was that show he's on? Those Hooterville, not Hooterville. Maybe it was Hooterville. Petticoat Junction. For your time, Conrad. Kids, Google the son of a bitch, will you? Just help me out here. But Edgar Buchanan was a character actor. That's kind of what Leonard Clay reminded me of. Edgar Buchanan in character as Uncle Joe. And so he paid me in hot dogs. I got 2 hot dogs for refereeing 5 matches, the only referee on the card. And I asked for a Coke, and he asked for 50 cents.
Oh, my gosh.
And so we did. That was not a success. But hey, that's paying your dues, buddy. So that's kind of the deal on the payroll.
Jim,
it was discretionary, and anytime you get into a discretionary scenario, you're always going to have some pushback because there's no roadmap that takes you there. There's no GPS for this process.
I feel like now's a good time to tell you that you're going to get 3 hot dogs and 2 Cokes for StarCast. I hope that's okay.
I'm ecstatic right now.
Let's talk about Tank Abbott. He makes the news here because allegedly he had meetings with you guys before he wound up showing up in WCW. And one of the things that makes its way into the newsletters is that he tells you guys in your meeting in Connecticut, he'd be a bigger star than Steve Austin. Chat me up. What do you remember about talking to Tank Abbott? Well,
it was an adventure. He was a very charismatic guy. I mean, he had a lot of charisma. There's no doubt about that. He's one of those car wreck type people that you can't hardly take your eyes off of because you don't know what he's going to do next in the scenario. We were a lot of us there. I know Bruce was, and myself. There may be a few others. I'm sure there were becoming MMA fans, specifically USC fans. And, he was a brawler. He kind of reminded me of Dick the Bruiser kind of a character, from way back in the day, a brawler, he's not a hole by hole wrestler. That's why when Dick the Bruiser was teaming with Wilbur Snyder, they had such a great combination because Wilbur was silky smooth like Nick Bockwinkel, and the Bruiser was a brawler. So that's kind of the thing there. He had a reputation. We felt like he wanted way too much money. And we kind of chuckled that, we're glad the guy's got confidence in his ability, but there ain't no way in hell he's going to be the next Stone Cold Steve Austin, at least in our view. And so we didn't explore that opportunity much farther.
One of the opportunities you guys were looking for is to turn Billy Gunn into a singles heel wrestler. And of course, you're going to try that in June where he's going to win the King of the Ring. But Wade Keller would report that there are some who believe the New Age Outlaws as a team are more valuable than the sum of the parts, and it's inevitable that they wind back up together. After you've had, a guy like Billy Gunn who had decent success with the smoking guns and then tried the rockabilly gimmick and the singles thing, and it was just a miss. But then he has his greatest success as a tag team. Why the push to break them up? Is that just the natural progression? Was Vince cooling on tag teams? Why split up the New Age Outlaws and try something different if it's working?
I don't know, and I have to ask him, but my sense of Vince and the tag teams is that Vince is not a fan of tag team wrestling in my view. Now, he may have relented on that deal. Maybe in this stage of his life, he's more open to everything, because why wouldn't he be? Why wouldn't he be? Because he's done the same thing by blessing the advancement and the evolution of the female division. But I don't know that he was ever a big time fan of tag teams. So, but it may have been also that their merchandise sales are down. They might not have had a good program. They seem like they cooled off. And I think too, Billy wanted to be a heel, and he wanted to be a single heel. That's how I remember it. Now, I hope I'm right on that deal. And so because he had been there and they're good soldiers and had worked hard, he and Bart, why not? So give it a try. Try to make the town happy. If he feels like he could draw money as a heel or be better utilized as a villain within the storylines, why not give him a shot?
Let's talk about the Mean Street Posse. We've recently talked about them with Bruce Pritchard on Something to Wrestle. I think everybody knows now these guys were real life friends of Shane McMahon. Chat me up about the way they were received in the locker room. This feels like a Vince Russo idea, but one that Vince probably would have loved. But you've got a lot of guys who are, friends with the boss's son who maybe haven't been to wrestling school and aren't the most experienced at what they're doing, but now they've got television spots. Feels like that's, maybe not the best locker room to walk into. What do you remember about that?
Well, it's a wrestling locker room. It's no different than it's been for years. There's a rite of passage. There's a respect factor. There's a initiation phase, some mild hazing, et cetera, et cetera. But those three guys, that formed the Mean Street Posse, and two of them, Pete Gass and Rodney, were on the high school football team at Greenwich High, the mighty Greenwich High football club that Shane McMahon played on in high school. So they're all buddies. They ran together. So they were joined at the hip. They were the three amigos, man. And then I think, who was the other kid? Jason Arndt. We put Jason Arndt with those guys. I can't remember, but nonetheless, they were respectful and they're good kids. And they were been warned. Shane did a good job of big brothering them about, you can't say that, you can't do that. Don't put your bag over there. And there is a respect factor. If somebody, a veteran, uses this certain spot to normally dress in, near the shower, near the can, whatever, you don't take that spot. It's just simple. So you defer. And they were they had good common sense, good families. So no, they were fine. And by God, listen, two tough guys, and they're good athletes. So, whether you like the cardigans and the sweaters and all that stuff, hey, but look, there were some things we'll probably talk about today that they were in a situation where they were drawing some ratings. And so if they draw ratings, anybody, and then a minute by minute, so bear it out, you can become a very popular guy in the locker room real quickly.
I'm glad you mentioned ratings, because around this time you guys broke an all-time viewership record for a quarter hour. And it was during the seventh quarter of a show with the finish of Shamrock and Triple H, and then the Big Show versus Undertaker match. And it gets a 7.32, which broke the all-time competitive quarter hour record of 7.23 set the prior October, with DDP and Bill Goldberg, where they replayed the match from Halloween Havoc, where the pay-per-view, ended, before the feed ended, before the show did. So it's a huge, quarter hour. And you and I've never really talked about this, but from your perspective, how in tune with the quarter hours was the creative, And were you guys monitoring? Was there some sort of accounting system on the back end for, okay, Big Show's averaging this quarter hour, and whenever we put Billy Gunn on, this happens? And are you guys keeping up with that, or is it not that scientific?
That's a great question. It should be. Maybe they're doing it now. At that time, I didn't ever see an official, summary of quarter-hour ratings by talent. Now, we certainly had kept track of all the quarter hours, and you knew who was in the match because it said there. But to keep a running total of how you did overall every week when you're on TV, I never saw that. But we certainly were aware of the quarter hours, and that can be a blessing or a curse. I got involved in some situations where my quarter hour numbers, with whomever was carrying me, were very, very good, which was a curse because if it's good, they're going to do something else. And I got tired of getting my ass. I got bloodied, and Bischoff broke a center block over my head. For God's sake, I always call that the Bill Shaw block of death. So anyway, but it's that, yeah, they kept track of it, and of course, it became a very valuable tool, and maybe too much so at times, because if something didn't get over, there may have been other reasons that happened. There could have been a news break. It could have been something on television, a competitor that they switched the channel on. I don't know. But sometimes it was a little unfair. It wasn't quite clear, but no official cumulative running total, but certainly the quarter hours the creative guys lived and died by the creative hour, the creative rating.
Let's move along to the May 10th Raw. And what I want to talk about here specifically is the dark match, because I was fascinated in my research when I saw that competing in this dark match is Owen Hart, who we're going to talk a lot about later on this show. And he is so impressed with his opponent in this dark match. He comes backstage and says, that guy's going to be world champ. And his opponent that night is a young upstart in a tryout who's just recently signed and trying to work out the kinks, Mr. Kurt Angle. When did you know that Kurt Angle was going to take to this like a fish to water?
About 15 minutes after I first saw him in a pro wrestling ring. And I'll tell you, we mentioned Dory Jr. earlier, and we shouldn't leave out Tom Pritchard whatsoever, because he was a big, big part of the success of the Performance Center, the concept, and training a lot of guys. Maybe didn't get the credit that he deserves, but Tom Pritchard's one of the best trainers in the business right now anywhere. You go that small group of guys like Lance Storm, the Dudleys do a good job, and their 3D thing. There's not that many. There's not as many good schools as there are schools, because some of them are jokes. But he did a great job. Tommy did with Dory. But they both spent a lot of time with Kurt, and I'd go over there in the afternoon after my office hours and see how things are going. And shoot, boy, that's all you'd hear is, man, this kid from Pittsburgh is amazing. You tell him once he gets it. And so Kurt had a feel for it. So it didn't take long. He was that good. He's that good. And quite honestly, even at, what is he now, 50 or something? He's still pretty damn good.
Yeah, no doubt about it. He's tremendous. And, it's a shame that maybe his in-ring days are over, but I guess it happens to all of us, unless you're Pat Patterson or Jerry Briscoe, because they're going to be in one of the highest rated segments on this special edition of Raw, taking on the Mean Street Posse. And it's supposed to be a comedy match. It is highly entertaining. It gets a tremendous rating. This winds up being the highest rated Raw ever up until this point. It gets a huge rating, but I guess what I want to talk about is, they come out to the Real American theme, which feels like you guys are maybe trolling the Hulkster a little bit. And
you think maybe? Of course it was.
Well, this is a tremendous match. It's super entertaining. That you've got two old veterans in here who probably shouldn't be in a ring with two guys who, with the Main Street Posse, who for the most part, probably don't belong in a WWE ring based on the quote unquote dues that need to be paid.
The training, they hadn't had a long time to train.
Right.
And the thing that we overlook sometimes, Conrad, talking about things like this, is that your first priority should always be not the quarter hour ratings and not the finish. It's got to be the safety of your people. And because, disasters can happen very quickly in this world, which are the subject of the show. Part of the subject of the show is such. But man, that's always what concerned me. Pat and Jerry were two tough guys. They're all-time legends. But look, they're getting long in the tooth for doing that job, taking bumps and bouncing around and trying to get over the soreness, all that stuff, and giving their body to somebody that's very green, that might be a little bit dangerous, inadvertently, albeit. So I was concerned about that. But you're absolutely right, Conrad. That's one of the most entertaining presentations that I have ever seen on Raw. It was just it's one of those things that comes out of the blue, like the this is your life rock thing. I thought that was going to suck. It was great, but that's the deal. Those kids learned a lot, and they were good, and they listened to the veterans who led them through the match every step of the way.
I want to mention that at the end of that match, when Patterson rips his shirt off like Hulk Hogan and starts hulking up and doing the posing and all that, you finish the segment by saying something like, "And fellas, he's single." Was that to pop the boys or what? That was hilarious, but it's way inside.
Well, it was way inside. It's me being, way inside. It felt right at the time, and I never got any heat over it, other than I got a lot of, that was funny stuff, JR. But it was a comic match. It was a comedy match. It wasn't Flair and Steamboat 3 times in '89. It wasn't those. It wasn't serious, deadly sports business and hard-hitting wrestling. It was comedy. So I felt like that adding a little comedy, a little cherry on the sundae at the end was somewhat appropriate, and it put back Pat and Jerry, I thought, back in a decent light as far as they win. We're having fun. Good for them. Thanks for coming. Next. So that was how that worked out. Nobody got mad. Pat didn't get mad. He rings up to me every now and then. Hey, Jimbo. Yeah, Pat, I'm still single. Okay.
The highest rated quarter hour of that show was that match. It got an 8.61, which is pretty crazy.
Can you imagine that today?
No.
Can you imagine an 8.6 quarter hour rating on Monday Night Raw today, and what that would mean in the media world, social media especially, and obviously, God, it'd be huge news. And then, because again, the redheaded stepchild called wrestling, when the company comes over, you go put the redheaded stepchild out in the barn so nobody sees him, and that nobody cared. Nobody cared that we did an 8 rating. And I think WWE at that time, I think we've talked about this too, not you and I, but when I was in WWE, we got to do a better job of telling our story. My grandpa said you can't sell goods out of an empty wagon. That's really true.
The main event of that show, we should mention, is The Rock teaming up with Vince McMahon and Steve Austin. They're going to take on Shane McMahon, Triple H, and The Undertaker. That match gets a tremendous rating as well, a 9.17, making it the most watched pro wrestling match in the history of cable television, and the first match in history to top 10 million viewers. When you get a report like that on Tuesday, does everybody just go straight to happy hour and it's cocktails all around, or how does Vince McMahon celebrate a big victory like this? 10 million viewers for the first time ever.
Those that weren't joined at the hip might have done a little celebrating, going to hit the happy hour. Those of us that were joined at the hip to the chief we just kept working, because a guy like me on Tuesday, I got this little thing called payroll to go through. And that one thing, the animals ain't going to be happy if they ain't fed. It's like a zoo. It could be a mutiny. Carnivores running loose, not cool. So we all had work to do, and houses to book, and cards to organize for the weekend. So we never got the opportunity and this another one was blessing and curse deals, Conrad. We never got the opportunity in that era to celebrate the great wins. But at the same time, we didn't have the opportunity to bemoan the bad ones. So I think it kind of balanced out, but there's just no celebrating in the world of wrestling that one would assume would be there, because it's always about the dollar. It's always about the next dollar. And that's what we dealt with.
Let's talk a little bit about the content of the shows. You are experiencing record ratings, but at the same time, you're getting a little bit of pushback to the point that Vince has to go to meet with TSN executives in Toronto on May 12th, where they're going to talk about the content of Raw and the when it airs and what may need to be toned down if they want it to continue to air. And I guess where we have the FCC here in the US, they have the CRTC. And we had heard down here, that TSN was editing a lot of the show anyway. What do you remember about this meeting that Vince had with TSN, and what was the strategy to sort of placate everyone?
Well, to placate, you just try to come to some neutral ground. You don't want to compromise your direction, or soften, over soften, the content. But you also had to be respectful of the fact that it's a TSN's network. And it's a very important network for our business north of the border there. So you've got to figure out a common ground. You got to figure out what you can or you can't do. So the meeting basically was to determine what they really didn't like, and they sometimes some things they didn't understand, and that could fall back on the King and myself. Maybe they didn't understand it because we didn't tell a good enough story. I don't know. Well, I think they had some old school values, and they were seemingly. And I'm not knocking the Canadian people whatsoever. They seem to be a little bit more common sense-ish, more what's the word I'm looking for? You know, they just seemed to be more conservative, and that was not Maple Leaf Garden wrestling. It was just, we're way out there. And again, but we're using this theory every week. We're going to take it a little farther and a little farther, and when we get too far, Vince will pull us back in. So I think that's kind of the situation there. So by him sitting in front of those folks there in Canada, I think it helped our case a little bit, because everybody got to see a face and they got to understand each other. And so that's kind of the deal there. We had to be careful. You didn't want to lose that clearance.
Guys, you've been hearing about Blue Chew for a while now. If you haven't tried it already, why not? BlueChew.com is helping guys needing extra confidence in the bedroom because of things like age, stress, or anxiety, and they can help you too. Blue Chew is a unique online service that delivers the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but in chewable form and at a fraction of the cost. And now they also have vardenafil mint flavored chewables with the active ingredient in Levitra and Staxin. Blue Chew's tablets help men combat all forms of ED. Because Blue Chew is an online prescription service, that means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversation, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. And it ships right to your door too, all in a discreet package. Now the process is simple. You'll sign up at BlueChew.com. You'll consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. And the best part? It's all done online. Blue Chew's licensed medical providers work with you to find the right ingredient and strength for your prescription. Don't like swallowing pills? No problems here. Blue Chew's tablets are chewable. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA. They prepare and ship direct, so it's cheaper than a pharmacy too. So if you could benefit from extra confidence when it's time to perform, visit BlueChew.com for more details and important safety information. And here's a special deal for our listeners. Try Blue Chew free when you use our promo code JR at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com. The promo code is JR to receive your very first month free. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring today's podcast.
Back in the United States, a lot of newspapers are running stories about how middle schools and high schools are banning wrestling from the school. So you can't have wrestling references. You can't wear wrestling clothes. And I'm sure a lot of this is because you guys were, selling pretty controversial shirts, that were in tune with DX or Mr. Ass or whatever. Does that conversation ever make it to your desk, or is that not something? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, here's why. It comes back again. The two C's always keep popping up here: cash and creative. If the creative of the t-shirts is becoming less edgy and not as topical and timely as they were when they were selling, then when they change the creative and they don't sell as much, it's going to cost the talent some money. And when you take money out of their pocket that was heretofore there, not a good deal. Some guys just don't understand the lay of the land, the big picture, and things like that. So I thought, to be honest with you, Conrad, and I'm like you, raised in the South. I'm somewhat conservative. You know, I was lucky to have a mom and daddy in the house all my life. Very, very fortunate. But I thought that the overreaction on some of these T-shirts and some of the, trying to protect kids from this, that, and the other, maybe it's just ahead of the social media thing. Maybe they didn't realize what was on television all the time. But I thought it was a tremendous overreaction to trying to push their values on a larger group of people, and I've never liked that.
Tell me a little bit about Ed Ferrara. It's written in mid-May, according to Wade Keller, that Ed Ferrara gave his 2-week notice, citing stress from the long hours as the reason. And McMahon didn't want to lose Ferrara, so he asked him to take a week to reconsider. And of course, we know that Ed has sort of been the right-hand man of Vince Russo. There was conflicting reports about why he wanted out. And Wade Keller says, it's just the long hours. Obviously he stays and he winds up leaving when Russo does in the fall. We haven't talked a lot about Ed, but I guess we should mention that, when Ed does jump to WCW, he becomes the person who portrayed the parody of yourself. Chat me up about your time working with Ed Ferrara and why he wanted to quit here.
I think he wanted to quit. I think he was getting burned out. And that was about the time that either SmackDown was getting organized or getting ready to be launched or had been launched. And those guys were they perceived, and rightfully so, that they had all they could say grace over writing a weekly 2-hour primetime show every week with no repeats and no off season. So I think they got burned out. Simple as that, Conrad. The two of them were doing that, basically most of the heavy lifting in that respect. But when when Russo left, there was no doubt in anybody's mind that was a package deal, at least in my estimation. I don't think that Russo was going to Atlanta without Ed Ferrara. And because there was a certain amount of leverage that Russo had at that time from his creative success that he earned at WWE, that he could pull that off. And they did have good chemistry. They did have good symmetry. The only thing that they didn't do well sometimes was get a little too far out there. Now, here's the deal. Well, yeah, you say that, JR, but God damn it. They look at the ratings.
Right.
Well, they didn't do the ratings alone. Then they won't say that either because they know it's not true, and they never said that I'm aware of. But the bottom line is that, you know, it's a team effort to have big wins like that, but they were a good team, and I just felt when Russo left that Ed was either joined at the hip or trailer hitched or whatever, but they're going to go together. No surprise whatsoever. I never had any cross words with Ed to the extent of, you know, being heated. I didn't agree with everything they did by any stretch of imagination, and I'm sure that they didn't agree with my work sometimes. But I never had any personal issues with them. The only issues I had with Ed and Russo that came to a head was the Oklahoma thing, where Ed would impersonate me with the Bell's palsy. And my daughters are young then, they're sometimes they're friends, they would get together. Folks don't understand this. You know, I didn't play a character. I was me. And all that stuff about the Bell's palsy was not an act. It was not work. It wasn't a storyline. And it was very unsettling in my family, in my life, in me. So, oh God, I just hate to think about that shit. But that pissed me off because it made my kids cry because they didn't understand. It was that it was totally satirical. It was just, I tell them, honey, it's just bad kids. It's just bad television. It sucks. They're not getting any ratings that I was aware of. They're not going to draw any money with it. And they didn't, as I was aware of. So they're using great television time to stick it up with one of Vince's right-hand guy's ass. And I don't, hey, I'm not angry at them now. I wasn't that angry at them then. But that's how I looked at that deal. That was a package deal. And when they went down there and they got back at JR for whatever reasons, if that was the case, they did a nice job of it, but it hurt my kids' feelings, and I didn't forgive them for that for a long time.
I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail another time, but I didn't expect to get into it today. But I do want to ask, when we think about that pairing of Russo and Ed, what in your opinion, and this is a weird sentence, but I think you'll get where I'm going. What makes Russo the leader and Ed the sidekick, and why not vice versa? It's interesting in these dynamics sometimes where one guy maybe has just as great or better ideas, but the other guy's a better communicator, or he's more out front, or he's more open, or what was the dynamic, and why was Russo sort of the lead guy and Ed was the right-hand guy?
Really good question, Conrad. That's why you're the goddamn podfather. I'm thinking could have been, if I'm not wrong here, that Russo was on the scene first because he was working in the magazine area doing some writing. And then he got, he finally figured his way to get into creative, and then eventually on television, because he and I were doing a little Saturday morning show for a while there. Call-in show, for God's sakes, live every Saturday morning. That's all I needed to do. No, one more job. If I got found a full-time gig on Sunday, every Sunday, I'd have been really happy. I worked every day. But I think he came there first. He was kind of a company guy that kind of evolved through the system and got a chance to make more money and do a different kind of gig that he thought was cool. He wanted to do, which is fine. It was everybody's goal, I guess. But I think Ed came along after that, and Ed had done some writing in L.A. and in Southern California. Ed also was a indie wrestler. A lot of people don't know. He used to have a picture hanging up of him in tights with bleached blonde hair. Looked like a poor man's Buddy Rogers from back in the 50s. And we used to get a kick out of that. But Ed is a big fan and a smart guy. Your question is right on the money. I would say this, and I think most people that know both these fellas would probably tell you that Russo is a lot more of the alpha male, over the top, a little louder, a little bit more, control guy. And I think Ed liked that role because Russo had to do most of the pitching, had to do a lot of the pitching and the interaction with Vince. And after a while, some people figure out if I can keep my job and I can make money and I can contribute to the company without having to have direct interaction with Vince on a daily, hourly basis, I'll probably last here longer. So that's kind of how I think that worked out. They were a good team. They had good chemistry. They liked each other seemingly, and they had, look, you can't take away from whether you like their songs they wrote or you didn't. They were hits.
Right.
A lot of them were hits, and they sold music, and that's all that matters. That the results are there, and they were. So I give the devil his due in that regard.
The results are there for Steve Austin on Nash Bridges. His debut appearance does a 9.8. He winds up doing 6 episodes there. He is now not just a star in the wrestling world, but in the mainstream. But Wade Keller would report around this time that there's already tension building between Austin and The Rock, because The Rock is now a babyface, and maybe now for the first time since he's been the top dog, Austin has a legitimate threat for his number one babyface position. And Rock is 7 years younger than Austin. And, maybe that plays into the competitive nature, but there is a little bit of tension that the boys are noticing and talking to the dirt sheets about. Chat me up. When did you first realize that, hey, wait a minute, these guys may be competitive rivals? Bruce has often sort of joked that Austin would say things like, oh, that whole eyebrow raising gimmick, that ain't going to get it. And Bruce would say, when you have the top dog start talking about guys underneath the card, like, oh, that's the shits, they're getting over. Chat me up. What was your perspective on this rivalry? I never thought
it was a big negative thing, Steve and Dwayne's relationship. I would have been very, very disappointed in both those guys if they didn't have a competitive feel for each other's at work. Austin didn't associate with anybody that I can remember on a personal level. And he just wasn't that kind of guy. He did his work and he went home. But I like the competitive nature. Look, here's the other deal. We leave out a lot of things here. And I didn't read about this. I didn't see Wade talk about, well, then how did The Undertaker take this deal?
Right.
How did some of the other top baby faces take The Rock getting over and becoming and flipping to a baby face. It's inevitable that when you have a young, brilliant stallion of a heel, that at some point in time, because of his look, his athleticism, his overall charisma, that he's going to become a fan favorite to some degree. Also became a fan favorite as this, kick-ass baby face. And Rock became a huge baby face by being a little smooth, silkier, more. He's more of a wrestler, also more of a brawler. So they had different styles, but I applaud the fact that they wanted to compete. And I'm about to tell you, they weren't the only guys that wanted that spot. That's the spot, man. So I like that whole dichotomy of those, of the way they work. And I never had one time that I could ever recall. And both those guys are friends of mine, and I had close relationships with both of them during that time and today. But shoot, I don't remember them coming to me and said, "You got to get that summit straightened up, JR. I'm going to go home." Or, "Hey, Rock always called me Jim. Jim, what's the hell's the deal with?" Nothing. They both were jocks. They both are alpha males. They both were high, motivated, high overachieving dudes. So anything less than being competitive, I'm not trying to kick Wade Keller on the bus here by any stretch of the imagination, but really, was it really that big a story? Well, the boys are saying that's his first problem. Well, the boys are saying, okay, all right, well, good for your source, Your Honor.
Let's talk about the No Mercy pay-per-view. It goes down in Manchester, England. It's sold out, of course. We haven't talked a lot about these UK only pay-per-views. As a talent, as someone in the office, was this more fun or less fun than a regular United States pay-per-view?
Didn't have any difference. That's the one thing about WWE, the same TV crew, same director, same technical director. Everything was except for some technicians that you had to use over there, but like a cameraman here and there, something like that, somebody behind the scenes. But it was just another way for the boys to make some more money. And for some of them, it was a way to get out of their wife's sight line because they're out of the country.
Your main event there is Steve Austin getting a win for the world title in a 3-way over Undertaker and Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And then you guys are back to business, doing huge ratings again. You're going to get a 6.34 rating, which is monster. The main event is Steve Austin and Triple H. And during that match, it's going to be a DQ, and the Undertaker is going to attack Austin somewhere in the mid card. That's a real sentence. The Rock and Undertaker had a casket match, which is, that tells you where we are in wrestling here when that's not the main event.
Yeah.
But it breaks the all-time Monday night ratings war for a competitive hour, at least during the second hour. You get a 7.3 for the Rock and Undertaker casket match, and the final quarter hour does a 7.2. Meanwhile, Nitro in that same heads up segment got a 2.5. So yeah, it's one-sided here. The night ends with a 7.8 for Raw and a 2.4 for Nitro. At this point, the Monday Night War is done. You guys have won. You're spiking the ball. Once upon a time, you guys were having conversations about, can we hang on? They're gonna finish us off. And now you're firmly in control. Is it business as usual the entire time, or do you start to pull your foot off the gas a little bit?
Well, I think it was pretty much business as usual. But business as usual, meaning that it was, the business kept growing and evolving. We're finding some success. We're doing well. And then all of a sudden, things are kind of back to normal, and we're still trying to grow our business. So it was the thing about working for Vince. People got to understand this, man. He don't celebrate many holidays. He loves Thanksgiving because he loves to eat. He loves to have, that's his great cheat day. The greatest cheat day of the year for Vince is Thanksgiving. He's a pie eating baby. I can tell you that, man. He can eat the pie, and he can. He was and you wouldn't think, well, looking at him, he'd eat that, but he once that Thanksgiving, that was it. So he didn't celebrate. He's not a normal cat. How can he be 70 something years old and still doing, 10 multitasking with big money jobs that he's doing right now? He's a different breed of animal that either you love or you hate. That's fine. But by God, unless you're just really, really stupid, you got to respect the old son of a gun. You just got to, because he's done a lot for our business that, you know, you and I are being able to take advantage of a little bit here. So it's all, that was good. So business as usual, Conrad. You know, what's next? What's next? How can we get better? And that's kind of the order of the day. Plus, there was going to be a lot of talent available when all this thing was said and done. I mean, when the WCW finally went belly up, there were a lot of really good talents there that are going to need jobs. So we kept our eye on all that situation and kept planning on what we're going to do next. So that was always the thing about Vince. What are we doing next? What have you done for me today?
Well, one of the things you want to do next is you want to have a conversation with, and Jericho is coming up with a expiration date of July 27th in WCW. And he has his eyes set on the WWF. Of course, he grew up in the WWF, and WCW's on their way down. And now he feels like this is the right time. When do you first remember you guys talking about, hey, what about Jericho?
Well, some of us were big fans of Chris Jericho's work for a good long while. And the guys like a Cornette and some of those other cats that were, you know, Cornette had used Chris and Smoky Mountain with Lance Storm. They're a great tag team. Storm and Chris were really good. So there were a lot of fans of Jericho's in the gallery. The issue I was going to have was convincing Chris that he'll make more money working for us than he would working for WCW on salary, in essence. The upside of the monies in WWE were unlimited. But the other issue I had was, you know, his height. Seriously. Now, people say, what? You know, there was that old promoter thing there. He's not 6'3" or 4. He's under 6 feet. Now, he'll be as good as anybody on your roster, and he generally is. But I had to be able to sell that. So I started going to Florida. I meet Jerry Briscoe down there in Tampa, where Jerry lives. And we had a meeting I remember, never forget, it's funny to remember certain things. I remember The Rock ordering that grilled chicken and those black beans and yellow rice. And I remember Jericho and Briscoe and myself meeting at a place called the Bombay Bicycle Club. Probably not even in business any longer, I don't know. But we had a good meeting, and I addressed the issues off the top. What do you think the first issue is? Cash. What's the second issue, Conrad? Creative.
There you go.
That's it. So I said, I can't pay you the guarantee you're making at WCW. Just couldn't do it. Don't have the budget. But I'll tell you this: we can give you this, which is a good payday, as a downside guarantee. That's the worst you're going to do. If you get over, and you believe you can get over it as you think you can, then that number is irrelevant. And that's exactly what happened. He got over, and he started making 7 figures, and he made a lot of money there for a long time because Chris Jericho knew how to get Chris Jericho over. And he was a great performer, and it didn't hurt this, that his debut was interrupting The Rock. Not a bad rub.
All right, let's talk about Shane Douglas, sort of the tale of two talents here. Keller would say, with the shortage of heels, the WWF is seriously considering hiring Shane Douglas, whose last WWF stint as Dean Douglas was a disaster on camera and in the locker room. In ECW, his body is beat down and his match quality and interviews have been inconsistent. And Terry Taylor, who is still trying to live down his recommendation that the WWF hire Public Enemy, is pushing for the hiring of Douglas. What do you remember about Douglas being discussed here?
Well, we're looking. You try to find a player that could come in. It's like equated to baseball. You want to, even if a guy's a 7 or 8 hole hitter, 9 hole hitter, he can contribute in that role. Then you take a look. Shane had a lot of talent, and he certainly, but like you said, his body started breaking down, and hard living, and hard working sometimes catches up to people at different times. He was and still is a very bright guy, and high IQ, very intelligent. And I was with him. Eddie Gilbert gave Shane Douglas his name, And I remember when Crockett bought Watts and Shane was on the team, Jim Barnett was in love with him. Oh my God. And we'd say, no, Mr. Barnett, you don't say anything about this to anybody, right? No. He's hung like a horse. Oh God. So it's funny shit. But that was Shane's introduction. He was a classic babyface, blue-eyed, blonde, good body, but it was time. There was just, we brought him in because we thought there was something left, and unfortunately, there wasn't enough left to take him to the next level. But at one point in his career, he would have been spot on right there. But it just different time, different place, different situation.
All right, let's talk about Over the Edge. On the Sunday Night Heat show before the pay-per-view, meat would beat Brian Christopher. Not the type of meat that Jim Ross likes to season, but a different type that maybe nobody liked to season. The Hardy Boys got a win over Goldust and Blue Meanie. Vince McMahon and Midian fought to a no contest when the corporate
epic battle.
When the corporate ministry interfered and quote unquote broke his ankle, so he couldn't ref the pay-per-view main event. And we're going to actually open the show with a tag match. It's our champions, Kane and X-Pac, going to defeat Mark Henry and D'Lo Brown. What do you remember about this match? You saw it this week for the first time in a long time.
Good effort by all four guys. Four guys I like a lot, so I'm biased. All those guys I've had a part, some role in their career at this very day, and so I'm grateful for that. It just showed that the leadoff position in a pay-per-view, in the philosophy and the mindset of many, is that you start off with something hot, something good, set the bar, get the crowd up, get the crowd invested emotionally and all that. And those guys did a nice job. They're two good teams, and Kane and X-Pac were very good. I mean, they were really good. And then you had Mark and D'Lo. Mark was very green, but Mark was such an attraction, and D'Lo was underrated as hell. The only bad thing about poor old D'Lo is I suggested a gimmick, and they went with it, and it ended up being the drizzling shits. Was we had him wear a chest protector because he did the frog splash, and we thought that the frog splash is because it had been used in a lot of other areas, notwithstanding Eddie Guerrero, but guys that do big splashes off they just not do the jackknife thing. But I said, well, make it more effective, make it a little different. And if he hits you with that chest protector, which may be loaded, wink, wink, it might help him to get an unfair advantage as a heel. It was a shitty idea on my part. So I apologize, D'Lo, if you're listening.
Well, let's talk about the next match here. It's a hardcore match, and you and I've never talked about your opinion on hardcore title matches. It's Al Snow getting a win over Hardcore Holly. They start the match in the ring, but of course they go through the arena stands and the backstage area, concession stands. They're all over the place. What was your take on this? You for it? You against it?
I like the hardcore stuff because it reminded me of various wrestling territories, Brass Knucks champion. And as it was originally designed, and then the hardcore title morphed into a comedy division. And that didn't trip my trigger. It was, again, the insatiable desire to create comedians out of wrestlers and pratballs and silly shit. I just didn't understand. I think to me, some of those matches became, unfortunately for the talent who worked their ass off, bathroom breaks and concession stand breaks and so forth, or channel changing breaks. It lost what it was meant to be, and it became again a SNL skit with physicality. Not all of them, but that's at the end. Hey, look, when you get 7 or 8 or multiple title changes in one match, really, and you want me to take this seriously? So it disintegrated a little bit in the perception, in my view.
Let's talk about, well, I don't know how to transition here. The next match was supposed to be the Godfather defending the Intercontinental title against the Blue Blazer. And that's when the accident happened. Mm-hmm. Of course, it wasn't shown on the broadcast. a video package aired, and then a Blue Blazer interview was being shown on the pay-per-view. And in the arena, this is when the accident happened. And after the video package is over, we would see a graphic on the screen showing Owen Godfather. And you said, we're going to an interview conducted earlier tonight with Kevin Kelly and the Blue Blazer. And then you said, we have big problems out here. After the interview's over, we see a live crowd shot, and you say, ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing live television, a lot of things can happen, and sometimes they are not good. The Blue Blazer, as we know, as Owen Hart, was going to make a very spectacular superhero-like entrance from the rafters, and something went terribly wrong here. Certainly Owen Hart, Blue Blazer, very serious situation here at this point. He's being attended to by the EMTs, and this is not part of the entertainment here tonight. This is as real can be. And the EMTs are attending to Owen in the ring now. And we are at a little bit of a loss at this situation. I've been doing this for more years than I'd like to admit. And this is one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. This is not your typical wrestling storyline. This is a real situation. Owen Hart was to ascend in the superhero-like entrance from the ceiling of this arena, and something terribly, terribly went wrong. And I don't know if the harness broke or what the malfunction was, but we are going to keep our cameras on this crowd at this point in time, simply because we're going to move on, ladies and gentlemen, as best we can.
Phew, man, that's a hell of an ad lib, huh? I had to process, the King and I had to process a lot of information that was fluid, that kept changing, kept evolving. So it's hard to get your feet on the ground and know, where are we? What has happened? How is Owen, most importantly of all? And by the way, are we going to go home now? Or are we going to continue the show? What's going on? So I was getting bits and pieces of information, because those decisions were being made by Vince and the staff on the pay-per-view side. Of course, everybody's concern was Owen, but I was just getting bits and pieces of information, and that's challenging. That's really challenging. So it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the last time I had to speak on that matter in that show.
Jim, I hate to be, I know this can't be comfortable to talk about, but did you see it happen, or when did you know that something was amiss?
Interesting story. I saw part of it happen. I think the King, who was sitting at my right on a two-man booth at ringside, I think he may have seen Owen. I think he was looking up at the ceiling there at Kemper in Kansas City. I was looking at my monitor. I've become normally a prisoner of my monitor when I'm broadcasting, because what you see on the monitor is what you got to narrate. That's the soundtrack that you're looking for. It's what you're seeing there, and how does it make you feel, and what do you say? So where I saw Owen was shocking, because he came right through my screen, flashed right down. It was like a falling star, right out of heaven. It's amazing. And little did I know what symbolically that would mean later on, but I saw him flash through my monitor, little monitor, not a big, like they use now, a little bit bigger, smaller monitor, but it was a blip. And then I looked up, and I saw his impact on the top rope, the turnbuckle area. And it was hard to process, Conrad. It really is still hard to process. When you told me we were going to do this show, I was leery. I still am. Not because it's not going to be a great show. It's a hell of a topic. But for me to be able to tell my story to our folks, I got to relive it again. I got to re-image it. And damn, for years I avoided that. For years, I looked at the little announcement that I got about a 10 or 15 second notice to make about his death, and that's what I saw before I wrote Slaughter Knocker, My Life in Wrestling. I knew I had to cover it, but I didn't want to watch the whole damn show. And so I watched that portion, so I could at least I get in the moment when we're writing. I could feel what I was feeling again, and it's just not a good feeling. So I'm glad to tell the story, but I want to tell you, there's just nothing. I think sometimes we talk about this stuff, well, the Montreal screw job and all these things. Well, that shit just moves on.
Right.
Montreal screw jobs are about cash and creative. God, folks, don't get crazy on this thing. creative was not agreeable to all the participants, and the cash was what it was, blah, blah, blah. This was a human life of a person that was universally liked. And then we could say, as a civilian wrestling fan, well, that's nothing unusual. Yes, it is in wrestling, because it's a jealousy business with fragile egos and hostile personalities and volatile people. And Owen Hart was none of those things. I've never met a guy in the wrestling business or a woman that's more universally loved, liked, and respected than Owen Hart. And I just, it's just, we lost such a phenomenal human being in that situation. But I looked back at it, caught it through my monitor, and happened to look up, sitting right there, a few feet away, and his body hit that top. And it was like him being expelled from a car wreck. It was so disturbing.
When you see that happen, I don't know the technology, so forgive me. Do you hit like a cough button? Do you hit like the backstage? Are you hitting a button somewhere to say, get somebody fucking out here?
Yeah, I said something along those lines, but there's a lot of communication to the back. Cameraman could talk to the back. The audio guy, that was there. There's all kinds of texts that had communication abilities to talk to the back, and I think everybody was on their phone, so to speak. They're on their headset to say, get word that, hey, look, this is a bad thing out here, because it was dark, as I recall, and it seemed to be dark. Maybe that's just my own mindset, but everybody knew right away. Now here's the thing: there are people in the audience. And some of the EMT type people, I think they believed it was part of the show. And some people even thought it was a mannequin or something. But he hits, and I look, and he hits, and then it's like, wait a minute, what is that? What happened? What just happened? What the hell happened here? And I remember the King got right out of his chair and ran over there. And I stayed back because somebody's got to stay there we're the voice of the damn show. You can't leave it. You can't leave your post. So King went over there, and then when King was there a few seconds, and he came back to me, and Jerry's face was ashen white as snow. His eyes were teared over, and he just looked at me. We gained eye contact. He just shook his head. No. So the King either had a premonition or just what he perceived was we're seeing the last moments of his life flash before our very eyes, because that was really what happened. So it was a treacherous day, man. Some of those memories are just brutal, really just brutal. And I can only imagine how they are for the fans and his friends, and most importantly, his family. So not poor us, not poor JR, poor Jerry, but man, it was brutal. It's absolutely brutal. There's nothing good. I don't know. Well, something good came out. What? Tell me, somebody out there can tweet me at JRSBBQ. What the hell good came out of it? So I work real hard now to throw my ass under the bus, but I don't know what good came out of that situation. It was a badass day.
So, now, this decision is going to be criticized for a long time. You guys have to decide what to do. You're going to go to the back, and, you've got to try to figure out what to do. And you're going to show the next match is Val Venus and Nicole Bass versus Jeff Jarrett and Deborah. And a lot of people would say the decision to continue the show was, classless, or a bad call. There's lots of different words used to describe this decision, none of them positive. This wasn't your call. The decision comes down from the top, but it is one that you had to make in a split second. When did you know, the show goes on? We've got to find a way to continue the show.
We had no time on the headsets to have elongated discussions. There was no real conversations taking place. I was sitting there receiving information, trying to process it, write things down, the bullet points of the matter. but I had no time to write some script or a lead in or anything. Just kept getting new information and more information. And finally, I don't think we ever said, we may have, but I don't think we ever made a point to say the show's going to continue because to draw attention to it. So that's my take on it, Conrad. I'm not sure there was ever any, at least in my headset, there was no conversation about not continuing the show. But that I'm positive that the conversation took place off air, so to speak. So it was tough, man. It was really tough. How do you handle that kind of stuff? And here's the thing: we talked about things like this before. Was it a mistake to continue the show? Arguably, yes. At that time, I don't know that I would have had the courage or the foresight to make that decision, because of all the people that bought the show and expecting a show, the cable companies, the issues it's going to cause. I guess, I don't know. There's no good reason. You can't justify doing it. It was the right thing at that time. At least that was what it was thought to be. Whether it was or it wasn't, that's what happened. But I don't know that I would have had the balls, the grapefruits, as Mr. McMahon would have, as to make that call. It's a tough call. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. It's not called pass interference.
What'd you think of the call?
I wouldn't have done it. I'm going home. I'm leaving. We're going to, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to continue. We got to do something else. We got to figure this thing out, when this is going to be replaced or how we're going to do it, or the matches that you want to see tonight are going to be tomorrow night on Raw. Because that was a luxury we had. If there was a storyline that we needed to do, it could be 24 hours post, 24 hours is not going to hurt us. But again, now we're talking about the goddamn storylines.
Right, which is stupid. Who cares?
It's exactly right. Exactly right. So, I would not have done it. And hey, look, all these years later, it's easy for me to go look in hindsight and say, oh, I would have done that. Oh, God, I would never book that. No. At that day, I didn't feel like it was the wrong thing to do because I was in shock of what I just witnessed. And when we were told we were going to go on, it was a numbing deal. I was nonplussed about continuing. And then especially when we found out the end game of that whole accident, what the outcome was for Owen.
Nobody knew what was happening, and you're the voice of this matter. Is Vince, we've heard as fans that Vince is in your ear trying to produce. Who's in your ear this day? Is it Vince? Is it Bruce? And what are they saying to say? Or are you just sort of shooting from the hip, freestyle?
Well, no, I wasn't shooting from the hip. I had to get the information that I was mentioning, kept processing new information because things kept changing. The Owens is being taken to the hospital, whatever. There was an update every few seconds, it seemed like. I got most of that, if I recall correctly, from Kevin Dunn, the executive vice president and the executive producer of the company, of Titan Television, WWTV, whatever, rich guy. So Kevin kind of helped us. He helped us walk through that thing and navigate it. But he was the voice for me, and he was getting information from security, from the medical people, from Vince, cable companies. So Kevin was kind of that clearinghouse on that deal, and he was funneling the information to me in succinct sound bites to provide more information so we could keep the audience updated until we came to some sort of resolution. Because even at that time, I wasn't sure. I didn't know Owen at that time was still alive. Before I got the word and had to make this announcement, but he was still alive, and I didn't know if the show was. I didn't even think about the show not going on until we made the announcement that he had passed, and then it hit my mind. We're gonna keep. I'm thinking to myself out loud. I'm thinking to myself, are we gonna stay here? We're going to work. And we did. And that was a tough decision. It'll always be a wrong decision for a lot of folks. It can never change someone's mind. I understand that. And over the years, I've mellowed a little bit in my wrath on certain things, but I'm still steadfast that we probably should have called it a night and moved on.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people agree with that now. That's not the call that was made, though. So you guys hear a package for this next match. And then we see a live shot of the crowd. And you said, well, ladies and gentlemen, again, Owen was scheduled to descend from the top of the Kemper Arena again in a superhero like entrance in his blue blazer character. And something has gone terribly wrong with the equipment that Owen Hart was being lowered down to the ring, and the paramedics are working on Owen Hart. And let me tell you, we are going to have, and we've already had some entertaining things happen as a part of this show. I don't know another way to put it. This is not a wrestling angle. This is real life. Owen Hart, the equipment malfunctioning, is being attended to right now by a host of EMTs, and we are not going to put this on television. This is not a sensationalistic attempt to leave a mark here on this event. We don't know exactly what malfunctioned. Obviously something in the apparatus, we assume. That's all we're doing, is assuming that went wrong, unless Owen inadvertently released himself before he was near the ring. So again, we will have our mixed tag matchup, and we will have the rest of this broadcast. But the bigger issue now is that a human being, Owen Hart, has been terribly injured here live on this broadcast. There's so many things that have happened here, but right now, nothing is more important than the health and welfare of not only a great athlete, but a very unique and a good human being who is now being attended to in the ring. And again, I can reiterate the best way I know how. Maybe I'm not being as articulate as I would like to be. I hope you can understand that this was not, I repeat, this was not a wrestling angle. This was not part of the storyline. This is a terribly tragic situation, and the EMTs are now giving Owen Hart external heart massage. Several folks are here to attend to him. And around this time, Jerry comes back and sits at the broadcast table, and you said, Jerry, King, I was just reiterating to the fans, this is not part of the show. We're here to entertain and have fun, but this is neither. And Jerry very somberly says, no, it doesn't look good at all.
All right. Yeah. He the look on his face told that story too. You know, it was terrible. Well, you know, all I'm doing is just trying to, provide information to the viewer and to the wrestling fan out of respect, and it was the right thing to do. But it was not, it was a walking a tightrope sometimes when you're, I look back at some of the great, and I don't consider myself one of these, by the way, but it made me feel like being like a war correspondent, and you're in an active zone, a hot zone, and you're trying to provide information, and there's no script, and there's nobody there with a cue card. There's nobody in my ear telling me what to say. And it was such a heartbreaking thing. But it was more shocking. The heartbreak came later, not too long later, but it was so shocking. You know, it's like, I can't believe that I just witnessed, after the fact again, one of the most respected men I know die before my very eyes. I had never in my life seen someone die before my very eyes.
You didn't know at this point he was dead, though, right?
No. But my point is that everything started changing. The outlook, my attitude, where everything, new information. I was on like brain overload, man. Trying to, and look, we're still going to have matches. How do you balance what you're seeing on your monitor to what you've been, your backstory, which is the story? It was just really hard. So that whole night evolved, and it never turned a good corner. It never went to a good place. We did not have a happy ending whatsoever.
No, and it's hard to even imagine that, you guys are going to try to do wrestling promos, but after this, we would cut to a backstage interview with Jeff Jarrett and Deborah, and you could see they're both upset. Deborah's trying to stay in character and cut the promo. But Jeff quickly says, Owen, we're praying for you, buddy. And then he tries to go back to talking about a wrestling angle, and you can tell he's shaken up. And allegedly this is, they would move Owen past him, on the gurney as he's doing this. There's no easy way to talk about this. He's going to go have a match with Val Venus and Nicole Bass, and there's a guitar shot, and Jarrett, who cares?
Exactly. Who cares? Nobody cared. And the crowd didn't care. I'm not telling you that mixed match was a bad booking. I'm not saying that whatsoever, but it was always going to be an attraction match. A mixed tag is not a heavy duty wrestling angle, but more often than not. And neither was this one. Or it was a mixed tag, right? So anyway, the audience tuned out. Mostly Lawler and I tuned out. And I can tell you this right now, until we talked about, to prepare for the show, I could have no more told you what was on that card, aside from that one incident that happened. I couldn't tell you who won, who lost, nothing. None of it mattered anymore. I wanted that gone from my memory. I often say, and especially since Jan died in March of 17, that I'm refusing now to leave my house with any negatives in my carry-on. My ass came to Las Vegas with no negatives in the carry-on, because I'm around people I love at this great event. But man, oh man, it was so, I don't know. Now all these flashes are coming to my head now. God dang, it's hard to articulate. I feel like I was back in Kansas City. It's not good.
The next match is an 8-man tag team match. There's a lot of guys in it. No one cares.
No bit. Not a damn. I don't know if they'd have cared if the Owens accident had happened. Frankly,
after the match, you make the announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, earlier tonight here in Kansas City, tragedy befell the World Wrestling Federation and all of us. Owen Hart was set to make an entrance from the ceiling, and he fell from the ceiling. I have the unfortunate responsibility to let everyone know that Owen Hart has died. Owen Hart has tragically died from that accident here tonight. Who gives you the news, and why is now the right time to convey that message? And
I don't know if it's right. I don't know the right time. We just got the information. It's going to get out. And I think, WWE wanted to control the narrative and just give the news first, that he had passed. I remember this about that announcement. I think we're in some, like you said, some sort of package or something. And, they're counting us out of the package, 1 minute type thing. So that means 1 minute to your back, simple stuff. And, Kevin Dunn says, JR, we're going to come back and do it on camera with you and King. And you got to give everybody an update on Owen's condition. And I said, nobody's giving me an update on Owen's condition. Oh, JR, he's dead. He died. And, nobody told me. I didn't say that to him. I just listened. And then he says, and we're back in 10, 9. Oh. So I got 10 seconds. I got 10 seconds to figure out what I'm going to say. It might be the most compelling. How could it not be the most compelling thing I've ever said on television? Serious, heartbreaking, legitimate, just crestfallen. And I got 10 seconds to come up with the verbiage. So I quite frankly, surprised I did what I did, but it was from the heart. And now the numbness sets in. Owen Hart is dead. And the numbness set in. And I couldn't go cry. I couldn't go be alone for a second with my thoughts. I sat right there in that chair next to the King, and we finished the damn show. I needed to get out of there. And that's why I've been so resistant over the years, even talking about this matter. It just brings back the worst memories of my entire career. And look, I've had everything about wrestling has been so poignant in my life. You and I have talked about this, Conrad, about when the Road Warriors returned to the WWE at Hammerstein Ballroom. Was the night my dad had a heart attack and died in Oklahoma. At least I used to kid somebody about, well, Dad, at least he got to ride a helicopter one time. So then I was in the UK, Capital Combat, when my mother died. Boom, heart attack. Both of them were 64, by the way. So, but this, because I saw it, I was there. It's not like my mom and dad died. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to make this thing a country music song. But when you witness something like that, Conrad, it's a whole new ball game. And that's what we did. And I had that image in my head. It's burned there. And I do all I can every day that I can just to get it out. I don't want to bring it with me. Although the other memories of Owen are phenomenal. Phenomenal. He's one of a kind. But that night it changed my life. It changed my life. And I wonder sometimes if that, pray to God, it never does to anybody else, and something like this, would the show go on or would the show end?
It has to stop. You know, I mean, I don't know that anybody, I mean, I think given the benefit of hindsight, I mean, if this happened tomorrow, and Lord knows we don't want it to, but if it did, I mean, full refunds, everybody goes home. I mean, who cares? You know, we're talking about silly wrestling angles and a doggone ticket to a show. I mean, who cares what the house was? Go home. Sorry. This is.
Yep. I agree with you. You gotta go. And again, on that night, all those live rounds being fired and you could only imagine the chaos backstage. I mean, it wasn't, even if Owen had not been arguably the most popular guy in the company, which I think he was, that there would still been chaos, confusion, hysteria, because there's absolutely, in our world at that time, that I'm aware of, no precedent. Other wrestlers had died in the ring. You know, like God bless the Silver King, who passed away a week or so ago, heart attack in the ring. But something like this, I don't think it ever happened like this. Nothing. So there was no precedent. How do you react? I don't know. I don't know how you react. When we found out we were moving forward, we're getting back in the truck and we're going to drive on down the road a little farther. The only thing you can do is we had it in, if you ever said JR ever called something in, I would tell you, go back and watch some of those matches post announcement of Owen's passing, and you'll hear a no fat Okie calling it in. I'm sorry about that. If it offended anybody at that time.
Oh, nobody cares. Look, Mick Foley says that, he was sitting in front of a TV monitor watching, and, he saw a shot of the crowd, and around that time, Pat Patterson came in the room and said that Owen had fallen off the catwalk. That was some 60 feet above the ring. And he says he's saying prayers as he races down the hallway, and he arrived, just as Owen was being wheeled into the ambulance. The Rock would say that he was in the dressing room going over his match with Triple H and China, and Sergeant Slaughter comes in the room and says, Owen is hurt. And he said, oh, come on. Are you serious? Or are you ribbing? He would write, Owen was known for his pranks. And I thought maybe this was another example of his twisted sense of humor. No, Sarge said, it looks pretty bad. They're working on him in the middle of the ring. So he goes straight to the curtain. And when he reaches the gorilla position, he sees everyone gathered around with a look of shock on their faces, just disbelief, and people are crying and hugging. Quote, and then it hit me. This is real. I walked up to the curtain and looked out, and the EMTs were working on Owen in the middle of the ring, giving him CPR, and the crowd was on its feet, absolutely silent. And I thought, my God, that's my friend. I have to go out there. And Vince McMahon was standing there watching everything on the monitors, and he was in shock, just like the rest of us. Vince, I said, I want to go out there. What do you think? And Vince just stared at me with a look on his face that seemed to say, Rock, that's up to you. After a few minutes, Vince spoke. He says, if you go out there, Rock, those people are really going to react to you. They may think this whole thing is a work. So I waited anxiously, helplessly by the curtain until they wheeled Owen through on a stretcher, and one of the EMTs was straddling Owen, pumping his chest, desperately administering CPR. And I walked alongside them and said a prayer as I looked at Owen's face. Then I helped them load the stretcher into the ambulance, and I climbed into the passenger side of the vehicle and looked in the back, and they were still working furiously on Owen. And I kept praying that God would save my friend's life. I was completely numb. And now somehow we had to deal with the task of going out there and performing. We, talked about the rest of our match, tried to finish putting things together, but it was almost impossible because we were so worried. And 2 minutes before we were scheduled to hit the stage, we were told that Owen died. And he started to think about his performance, and he knows that sounds strange, but he was asking himself, can I really go out there? not should I go out there, but can I? Am I capable of performing? And he envisioned Owen saying, DJ, you have to go out there. And he personally felt comfortable with going on because he knew Owen and believed Owen would have wanted that. What say you, Jim? Do you think Owen would have wanted the show to continue?
I think so. Maybe not the popular answer, folks, but I can only give you guys honesty. We talked about Vince's uniqueness, and he's not the average cat. Neither was this Owen Hart cat. I mean, he was a wonderful guy. He loved what he did, and he loved the fans. You know, one of the great stories about Owen is that, you know, he had fans that were his buddies in all these towns because he'd stay with them. He'd stay in the hotel room. Over the years, there's no telling how many thousands of dollars he saved by staying at a fan's house, literally at a fan's house. They'd pick him up from the airport, take him home. That was Owen. He loved the business and loved the fans, and he loved to make them happy or excited or whatever. And I think he probably said, listen, we got to finish the show for these people that paid their money and brought their kids here. And so, but again, this other side of that coin is so prominent, Conrad. It's so easy to turn that coin over and look at the other side, as you say, but it still isn't the right thing to do.
Jerry Lawler says that, he was watching everything on the monitor and you're both looking down, and he said he doesn't know why, but for some reason he glanced up and was kind of looking around and he saw a blur, and then he saw the referee grab his head and he started to stagger across the ring. And Jerry then says he saw Owen lying in the ring. And that's when Jerry realized that Owen must have fallen, and he remembered elbowing you, and you looked at him, and Jerry said, because your mics were live, he mouthed to you, he fell.
That's true.
Jerry said you looked at him puzzled, and Jerry said again, Owen fell. And then he took the headset off and went to check. And he said Owen was laying motionless, and his arm from his elbow to the top of his hand was off the mat, and said it was sort of like Owen was reaching out. And when Jerry saw that, he thought Owen was moving and thought he would be okay. And later he realized that Owen's arm was shattered and it was stuck in that position. And he's standing there looking at Owen, looking at his face. And he said he could literally see blood in Owen's face, turn gray from the tip of his nose all the way down as it was settling in his body. And that's when he realized that Owen was gone. And Jimmy Corderas was the referee in the ring. And he said that he heard people yelling and saying that it was Owen yelling to get out of the way. And he says he can't confirm that, but he wouldn't doubt it, knowing the guy he is, that he was coming down and probably saw there were a lot of people at ringside who didn't realize that he was coming down, and he's yelling, move out of the way.
Wow.
In my research, I thought that was just like, even now when Owen knows I'm about to be hurt, this is about to be real bad, he's still thinking of everybody else. Does that not say everything there is to say about Owen Hart?
That's all you need to know right there. That's all you need to know. He's fallen to his death. You take a miracle, save his life from that fall. And he's thinking about making sure no one else gets hurt too. And, his heart, he's the heart thing, you know, he's aptly named, man. The youngest of the Hart kids, maybe he was just, I wish people could go back and see younger fans today. And they got the YouTube, you got WWE Network. There's a lot of ways to access Owen Hart footage. But if you watch what he does, what he did, he was amazingly talented. And he had a patience and a love of the business that allowed him to be extremely unselfish, working with people that were less than Owen's skill level. And quite honestly, boys and girls, most of the talents that Owen wrestled were under his skill level because he was that good.
Jimmy says that he felt like Owen was looking out for him because he was yelling at him to move. He was still cleaning the debris out from the hardcore match before. And he says, I don't know if it was his hand or his foot, but I was holding the top rope as I was kicking debris out of the ring and moving towards that corner. And almost instantaneously, I felt something brush against my head, and the top rope snapped out of my hand and snapped back and jammed my fingers. And I thought the top rope broke because they use actual rope in the WWE. It's not cable. So I'm looking at it and the rope's intact. And I'm like, what the hell? Did somebody throw something? And as I turned around, you know, he was there. You're trying to put 2 and 2 together, but you can't. And he says the next day he found out from Jerry Lawler that when Lawler saw, he thought, my goodness, he's going to fall on Jimmy. So they was that close. And maybe that is the voice that he heard saying, move out of the way, that it was Owen trying to look out for him, which is just unbelievable. And right or wrong, Vince Russo has caught some criticism about bringing back the Blue Blazer. And, you know, at different times, Brett has been pretty vocal about saying that Owen didn't like this stunt and wasn't comfortable with it. Did you ever have a conversation with Vince Russo about, you know, making Owen the Blue Blazer and whether or not he had any sort of guilt or weird feelings about this?
Well, the Blue Blazer aspect of this conversation was never really that negative to Owen. He didn't have a problem being the Blue Blazer. That whole stunt really rose to a boil on the Sunday. Hence is why they tried so hard to get a rehearsal out of it, which I found to be somewhat crazy. Is he the only guy that could rehearse?
Right.
I thought that was poorly done in hindsight. I didn't have a lot to talk to Vince Russo about in that regard. But when a talent is outwardly so uncomfortable doing a specific creative piece of business, you can't force them to do it with good conscience. You can legally force them, or you can pay their hand. So if you refuse to do as you're instructed, you could, you know, breach your contract. So I didn't talk to Russo. I did talk to Jimmy Corderas, of course, to give him a big hug the next day and want to know if, what do you need? You know, you want some time off? You want, you know, it was just that kind of thing. I was so busy, Conrad, on that day in St. Louis that after the pay-per-view, talking to talent and trying, you know, I didn't know what we're doing, but now because there's so goddamn many tragedies in our country and other countries, there's all kinds of grief counseling, and there's, you know, all kinds of things are now put in place that when you have a catastrophe, you got counselors on the scene and do this stuff. I don't know that occurred in too much prominence during that time because, again, unprecedented. So hopefully they learned things from that. They mean WWE, and I think they have. They certainly haven't tried that entrance or anything remotely close to it. Shawn Michaels' thing was years before at L.A. at the WrestleMania, and that was iffy. I don't know why we did that. Sliding down that thing, you know, I don't know why we did that. Is it that sensational? Is it going to make the match? Or is it somebody's idea, crazy-ass idea, that egocentrically they got to make sure it happens? I just didn't understand it. And when a guy that understands the business comes to you and says, I'm uncomfortable or whatever, man, you got to listen. You got to listen, because here's the thing. What if we had not done the entrance that way?
Right.
So what would the fans have missed? Not a damn thing. It wasn't advertised. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't know that Owen was going to, or the Blue Blazer was going to, you know, descend from the rafters. But, you know, so you're not cheating the fans out of anything. It's not, you didn't say it's Owen Hart in the most spectacular entrance ever on pay-per-view. Tune in. No. So just common sense, Conrad. When the wrestling talents put their lives on the line, their bodies on the line, if they feel like they can't execute something, for God's sakes, don't put them in that position to do so. And don't overthink the goddamn wrestling business. Sometimes we do that, even today.
Vince Russo says the whole idea just started so innocently. We'd brought back Owen's old gimmick, the Blue Blazer, and he was meant to be like a superhero, but a spoof on a superhero to really get over the comedic genius of Owen Hart. It was probably the Friday before the show, and the show's already written, and I got a call from Steve Taylor, and he goes, look, I just got a call from the people who propel Sting from the rafters. They say they're going to be at our pay-per-view, and they want to know if there's anything they might be able to do for the WWE. So while he's telling me this, I'm looking through the show and I see Owen and I'm saying, Well, that'd really be great to elevate Owen's character. That'd be something special and cool.
Elevate his character. Jesus.
So now during the day of the pay-per-view, Owen comes up to me and he says, I rehearsed propelling from the ceiling, and when I propel down, it takes me a while to get my harness off. If the Godfather is in the ring first, and then I propel and I got to take this harness off, and the Godfather could pummel me. See, everyone at the time was thinking real reality. So he said, could my entrance come first, then have the Godfather come out? And I said, oh, and no problem. I'll make the changes. No problem. And that was it. That was the extent of the conversation.
Not enough. In hindsight, it's just not enough. I'm telling you something. You pay attention. You look at a guy like Owen, it's very expressive. If he's not beaming or laughing about something or smiling about a pay-per-view match he's going to have, there's an issue. I'm suggesting to you and our listeners that there probably wasn't a lot of laughing and camaraderie in explaining this thing. And then, of course, you look back as you go on, you find out that the guy that was actually the rigger for Sting was not the guy that WWE used.
Is it true? Meltzer would write this. Just before all of this was going on in front of the fans at Kemper Arena and being somewhat hidden from the rest of the world, with Ross claiming they didn't want to sensationalize what was happening, backstage, something else was going on. Vince McMahon was setting up a scene where he'd be on a stretcher and begrudgingly taken to the hospital in an ambulance. McMahon was put in the ambulance while Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe did their comedy routine and driven away. And just as it was pulling out and after the scene was cut, Bruce Pritchard screamed that the ambulance needed to come back. Even though doing a mock angle where McMahon would be taken out in an ambulance after Hart had just died would be in the worst possible taste, it was also in the script, and apparently nothing, certainly not good taste or apparently not even a death, was going to make them alleviate key points in the show. Your response?
Well, again, chaos, unorganized. And I'm not saying unorganized like all of us are incompetent. We weren't all incompetent. But we had not been there before. It's just we haven't been there before. And the issue of human life teetering here had never been even remotely approached in any of our careers. So how you handle things that you've never experienced before, you don't know, Conrad, until you do it. I can tell you that right now, man. I've done some things in the last couple of years, and of course, when Jan's situation was, I don't have to even think about, but they're there, and they're never going away. So I flipped the switch, and I think of the great things that I did with her, much like I did with Owen, the fun, the laughter, and the great times we had. If I don't do that, then I can't get out of the god dang black cloud. It's got to go away at some point. So it's just like I said earlier, hey, we were in a little spot, Lawler and I, a little spot out there, but man, I always, I was thinking all the boys said, man, Cherry, you should be glad you weren't backstage. It was unbelievable. And some of the boys are becoming very, very emotional. Some of the women were extremely emotional. They were scared. A lot of people were scared. They didn't understand, confusion. And it was just the worst day of my professional life, without a doubt.
I do want to ask, everybody has chimed in and a lot of people as fast as the next day, the mainstream media picks up on the decision to go forward with the show. And, the company's been criticized up and down for the decision to continue the show. Did you ever have a conversation with Vince about it after the fact? Not right then, not in the moment, not the next day or a week later, but just later. It's been 20 years. Did it ever come up in your casual conversation?
Never did. I tell people this, it's honest to God truth. The more often that I can avoid getting back into this dark place, the better off my life is. It's hopefully this is an entertaining presentation today for our audience and our folks that are supporting the hell out of us, which we appreciate. But man, I don't want to talk about this again. After today, let's move on. I know we're going to move on.
Sure.
I'm just saying in in a reality way, okay, I did it, and maybe I can find some cathartic benefits from doing it today, but I don't want to do it again.
Owen Hart was obviously not an old man. I mean, he died, 34 years old, and Meltzer would write that there was a story going around that Owen was getting ready to retire from wrestling when his current contract expired in 2 years. Did you ever have conversations with guys when you were, talking about their contracts, about what their long-term goals were? And, you've told us about, they got to pay their taxes and blah, blah, blah. Did you have conversations about retirement? Hey, how do you want this thing to wind up?
Sure. You always want the guys to have a, if you can orchestrate it, a smooth exit, like in any other company. He'd been a long time, loyal soldier in the wrestling business. He came from one of the greatest, if not the greatest, pro wrestling family in the biz, and certainly in Canada, without any doubt. So at least that's my opinion. So, but we talked. Yeah, he's like everybody else. The two C's that always pop up, and for him, he was making good money, but I don't think he was overwhelmed with a lot of his creative. And I thought that, he had some good moments. I thought, of course, him and Bulldog, amazing team. But I thought Owen and Yokozuna was a good team. The yin and the yang and the big heavy hitter and Yoko and Owen could do all the stuff that needed to be done prior to a finish occurring. But we had talked about it. I think a lot of it, too, was travel. Maybe he got tired of staying in those fans' houses when he was on the road. I don't know. I'm kidding, laughing. But I think his kids were a big issue, too. He didn't want to be on the road all the time when they were growing up. And he had saved. He was a very thrifty fella. And he knew the value of a dollar. And somebody would say he had 50 cents of the first dollar he ever made. He'd saved his money. And I thought that was just phenomenal. And they'd built their dream house there in Alberta. And he had 2 children and his wife, Martha, and, it was good. So he wanted to, he was not angry when talking about retiring. His conversation about retiring to me was one of, hey, I'm going to do my 2 years. I'm going to continue to save. Hope I need to make some more money if I can, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm going home. Cool. Well, so my deal would be this. What can we do as a company to help you facilitate that? Because look, the guy basically giving us a 2-year notice.
Right.
A lot of guys don't do that, my friend. So that was the deal. He wasn't bitter or angry about the business. But that, I think that changed. His attitude changed a little bit after Montreal, but he also got a new contract after Montreal for the sake of the heartbreak and all this that the Montreal screw job had caused the Hart family. That's my take on that deal wholeheartedly. Vince, JR, make Owen happy, because this is going to be a tough place for him to be with the way Brett exited. But we don't want to lose him. He's too valuable. And I said, well, he thinks he's been underutilized. And I said, I can't disagree with him. He just doesn't squeak enough. The squeaky wheel gets the grease and all that good stuff, the good cliches. Owen didn't squeak a lot. He just was a soldier. And Vince agreed with that, by the way, Conrad. We always talk about this guy's a hero here. Owen Hart, after Brett left, should have been the heir apparent to the top Canadian star in the company, without a doubt. If I piss somebody off on that one, then sorry, but that's the way I look at it. So that was the story there, buddy. I think that he was making a plan. He had a plan, a life plan. And so much today, we don't see that in athletes or performers or certainly wrestlers, because everybody's chasing that one more payday. Hey, there's a lot of guys at this amazing event here in Vegas that are chasing a payday because they need the money. God bless them. I was as supportive as I can of all these dudes, but that's the situation. He wasn't in that mindset. He was going to be financially comfortable to be able to spend great productive years with his wife and raising his children. And let's not forget, his mom and dad were not getting any younger. And he was the youngest child. And he's also had those deep roots in Calgary. He wasn't going to move to someplace else, Florida, or wherever. So he was just a different man. I had great conversations with him about his career and ideas, and he'd give you feedback, and he'd tell you, hey, you take a look at this guy. There's a guy down in so-and-so that might be good here. He was a team guy, man. He really was.
Martha Hart wrote a book called Broken Hearts, The Life and Death of Owen Hart. And she tells the story of Owen eating lunch at Kemper 6 hours before showtime when he's approached by Bobby Talbert, a rigger out of Orlando, Florida, hired by the WWF to coordinate the stunt. And he would introduce himself to Owen and brag that he was the guy who had done this for Sting. And he alludes to the fact that Vince was unhappy with the speed and fumbling around that happened when they did this stunt 6 months prior or so in St. Louis. And now they're going to do a new quick release snap shackle that would make all the difference in the world. Once he's lowered to the ring, he just gives a light tug on a release cord. It disengages the rappelling line from the harness, and in a split second, he's free to move around the ring. And they do a test with a 250-pound bag of sand. And the second test is with Matt Allman, who is the assistant to Talbert, strapped to the harness. And they run both of these tests, and everybody seems okay. And then they want to do a dry run with Owen in the harness. And according to Martha, Owen politely declined, saying, I've done it before. It's no big deal. And just wasn't worried about it. Martha would say that Owen argued with the script writers about, trying to, not be happy with the way this was going down. And, they're going to do a spoof where they're going to have Max Mini attached to the harness. And,
that's going to get him over, right? That's going to take Owen to the next level. No doubt about that. It's just so stupid. It's so stupid. It's ill-conceived. Now, if you say it's going to be a spectacular entrance, fine. Maybe it will be a spectacular entrance. It'll certainly be a unique entrance. I don't know how spectacular it's going to be. It's going to be unique. But, it's just to say in that same breath, in that same pitch, it's going to take him to the next level. It's going to have him get more notice. It's going to be a positive thing. It's not going to be a positive thing to the character. Because what can you do with it? You can't have a match on it. You don't want to put a vertically challenged little guy on there, dude, like you're two guys jumping out of a damn airplane parachuting. It just didn't make any sense when you stopped and thought about it. It was a sensational idea, pull out of somebody's keister, and it just the more I think about it now, that's why I don't think about it a lot. I'm getting pissed off. It just wasn't necessary.
I didn't know the Max Mini detail that he was supposed to be in an identical blue blazer outfit, and Owen's not wanting to do the rehearsal, saying, hey, if Vince wasn't happy with how I unhooked myself, I definitely don't want to have to worry about unhooking someone else, especially, since Max Mini doesn't even speak English. That's going to be even more difficult.
Yeah. Hello, Houston. Hello. God. Conrad, the more you talk about this, the more absurd it becomes all over again. Max Mini. Oh, we got to laugh at us. Laugh. Let's make wrestling as funny as we goddamn possibly can. Because everybody knows that a wrestling fan really wants just to watch big guys act and be funny. We want wrestlers to be untrained, but very funny comedians. Somewhere along the way, that trend hopefully will stop, and maybe Saturday night. But nonetheless, I don't get again, I'm all over the place here. I get it. I apologize, folks. But God dang, man, I'm having so many flashbacks, and this ain't easy.
So he begs off of the rehearsal, and it's written in Martha's book. His motive for begging out of the rehearsal was as much to do with inconvenience as fear. He just didn't want to waste time sitting around waiting for other people to get their act together. And he finally says, okay, I'll come do the rehearsal at 2 p.m. And of course, 2:00 comes and there's no sign of Owen. And he's hopeful that, he can get out of this rehearsal and just do it because he's done it before. And because he's not there to do the rehearsal, they decide they're going to do the Max Mini dual drop the next night in St. Louis on Raw. And Owen stalling that tactic, I guess, inadvertently saved Max Mini's life, which is pretty crazy to think about.
Yeah. Sure is.
He finally got back to the arena around 3:00 and tried to do the, I'll be right back. And, just trying to do whatever he could, to get out of this. And eventually he gets on a steel graded catwalk, and he's in the southwest corner of the ring, standing on a catwalk with Talbot, staring down at a large scoreboard that he's going to slide past on his way down. And, apparently Talbot would later claim that he briefed Owen on the importance of not touching the quick release cord before landing, saying,
Jesus Christ, not touching it. Here, look where he is. Don't touch it now.
Yeah.
How the hell can you guarantee somebody's going to be dropping from the sky and not inadvertently touch something that they weren't supposed to touch? This is, again, untrained stunt man. Owen Hart, that was him. He's not a stunt man.
Do you see them working through, or are you ringside? Cause I know these days, sometimes announcers will hang out as guys are sort of doing walkthroughs and things like that. Were you ringside for, early before the doors are open, or are you in the office? Are you in the back?
I would probably be, out at the ringside position, trying to get any germane and important feedback from the talents regarding what they plan on doing that night. But I never was I'm probably not as involved in that as some of the guys are today, because I felt like it always stymied me to know more than I needed to know. And if they wanted to call this in a reality way, in a sporting venture type feel, then I don't need to know the finish. If I'm going to do a football game, they're not going to tell me Alabama's going to win again, even though we know they are. I wanted to say it from my own eyes and put my own narrative on it. So I would go out, stay out there for most of the afternoon, but you didn't have to get information from everybody. I just need information from the things that we're featuring. It would not have been an 8-man tag or a mixed tag. What they did was fine. But on the big stuff, the main event stuff, then matches involving Austin and Rock and Taker and Hunter and those dudes, Mick Foley, I would have certainly been out there to get some, what are we doing here? Anything I need to know. And sometimes it's simple. Nope. It's all straightforward, JR. Okay. You'll see it. Good. Thank you. Then I would leave and go back to my little talent relations office and finish up my show notes, just to organize everything for the, working without a net that night on a live pay-per-view. So even they had a rehearsal, I may have missed it because I may not have been sitting out there. I don't remember anybody rehearsing. So I apparently didn't see any of it. Did somebody rehearse?
Yeah. Talbot would say, as long as you don't put your hands on this, nothing's going to happen. And when you get to the floor, you grab it and give it a deliberate pull upwards. So it gives me a visual cue to pull the rope back up. And Martha would write, despite having difficulty in trying to keep his cape from interfering with his arm movement, the test went relatively well. However, upon landing, Owen forgot to pull the release cord, prompting several WWF officials to scream and yell at him as he moved around the ring with the rope still attached to him. Asked if he wanted to try it a second time. The answer was a quick, no, I got it. I take it you didn't see the rehearsal.
No. And there are two reasons for that. A, I could have been very busy with another talent's issues. I could have been sequestered to work over my show notes. But the other thing is, the less I knew how something was going to come off, the better I felt like I could react to it. I often wonder if I had known that Taker was going to throw Mick off the top of the cell in '98 in Pittsburgh, how I would have called it. And I thank God that I didn't know that I even wanted to do that, because then everything was real, organic, and exactly how I felt at that moment. I kind of wanted to protect that feeling, because I never was a guy that needed to know all the information. Hey, when he worked for Cowboy Bill Watts, he didn't tell you nothing. He told you just philosophical points, but he didn't give you all the inside stuff. on a TV finish. If I was not articulate enough to recognize what was going on and to put a narrative to that music, to their action, then I got to be replaced. That's what would have happened to me. I'd have been gone. Luckily, he taught me good enough that I was well enough, I should say. My verbiage, my diction's not so good now, but apparently, but he taught me well enough to where I got by. But that's the deal. The less you know, the better you are, Conrad. And I can promise you that's like me taking you to a movie and then telling you all the good shit. Hey, Conrad, watch this. She's getting ready to get killed. Watch this. You'll love it.
Martha wrote, noticeably quiet as he made his final preparations. Owen paced back and forth, prompting longtime colleague Dustin Runnels, aka Goldust, asked him if he was nervous, and Owen admitted he was before Runnels assured him it'll be all right. And Owen placed his cape and mask into a duffel bag, and to help conceal his identity for the walk through the crowd to the rafters, he put on prison-like coveralls and wore a baseball cap pulled down over his face. And leaving his dressing room with the bag slung over his shoulder, he bumped into Harley Race. Told by Owen he was very uncomfortable with the upcoming stunt. Race tried to put him at ease by joking, "Be careful that rope doesn't break." And Harley's wife, BJ, offered up a hug to comfort him and asked if he felt better. And Owen said, "The only thing that makes me feel better is your cooking." And then Owen goes down the hall to an elevator that takes him to the basement of the arena to the main concourse. He walks briskly past hundreds of wrestling fans staring at the ground, trying to remain anonymous, headed for section 221, where he hurries up several flights of stairs to the last row of the building and then climbs a rickety wooden ladder to the catwalk, and obviously not designed for heavy traffic. And that's where this would all happen. He's going to get up there and be greeted about a half hour before the stunt is to occur. And Talbert has worked in the stunt business for 7 years. But he's an independent contractor, a special rigger for Universal Studios. And he lands this job based on saying he had 2 years experience, as we said, doing the entrances for Sting. And I guess, he's coming down from the rafters almost as like a parody of Sting. Is that sort of the idea? Because, hey, that's what they're doing. We'll sort of mock that and say, "Hey, look, this is what our parody superhero does," sort of like the Top Star on the other channel.
I think that's Conrad. I'm sorry. I think it's basically another illustration of, they wanted to satirize Sting. Sting was the top dog in WCW, their homegrown, personally developed star. And I think it was just another shot along the lines of a Billionaire Ted skit or something along those lines. It's Razor, my little Razor and Diesel thing that I did with Glenn and the other kid from Canada. So it was. Here's the thing: when you pitch an idea like that to Vince, as competitive as he is, he's going to love it. If he thinks he's going to piss somebody off that he's competing with, or he's going to get the mental edge, he's going to love that. He's going to love doing it. He's going to thank you for coming up with the idea. So then at the end, you say, okay, now we're going to do this thing. If you say it's going to be very entertaining, and that's all we need is this entertainment, then maybe we'll get lucky. But if we're going to use it to draw any money, we're farting in the wind. Ain't going to work. Going away. Evaporates. And I think that's kind of what this was. We've made fun of everybody else. Now let's make fun of Sting, who didn't bother a soul in the world on none of this stuff.
Minutes from his cue, Owen apparently moved his arms out and away from his body several times to try to reposition the cape in an effort to conceal the harness. And the cape was awkward and heavy and had a tendency to choke him if it wasn't positioned properly. So this is what he's doing. And he's even trying to step over the railing and outside of the scaffolding to get ready to make the jump, but it's difficult with this cape. Eventually they check the tension, and now he's sort of dangling by the shoulders and he's ready to go. And, well, here it is. Perhaps being somewhat choked by the cumbersome cape, Owen extended his elbows out and away from his body in an effort to make a subtle adjustment to the cape. It was then that three riggers were horrified to hear the distinct sound of the snap shackles release. Talbert looked down immediately to see Owen plunging towards the ring, falling backwards and in a slight clockwise spiral before landing violently 78 feet below, shattering his left arm just above the elbow and causing massive internal injuries. Upon initial contact, Owen was flipped backwards by the highly strung cable. His 229-pound body camored into the ring, where he sprang a foot off the canvas before settling into the corner, lying motionless on his back with his feet pointing towards the center of the ring and his head mere feet from the apron. It took several seconds for his rubbery arms to rest at his side, bouncing off the spring-like canvas.
Well, that's a hell of a, I wonder where she got a lot of information, or had a lot of information in her book about what went on backstage and his mood and so forth. I just wonder who all her sources were. Just curious, out of curiosity, not out of vengeance or anything negative in that regard. I just wonder, because some people are very willing, apparently, and I don't think that's a bad thing, that she was informed of everything that went on, and that was a big, all that information played a big hand in her lawsuit.
She would continue unconscious due to the violent impact that tore his aorta and instantly began filling his lungs with blood. An innate survival reflex prompted the muscles and nerves of a wide-eyed Owen to attempt to sit up, described by one man looking like someone struggling to finish off a set of 100 abdomen crunches with one final desperate attempt. Owen was unable to do much more than lift his masked head a few inches off the mat. It's pretty crazy. You know, she would say that he was moving at a rate of 45 miles an hour. And,
when he came through my monitor, pardon me, when he came through my monitor, it was a bullet train. It was just a blur. Boom. And that's why I wasn't sure what I saw coming through my monitor. And then I looked up just a few inches, just raise your head a little bit. And there he was, and he hit. So my timing was bad I couldn't make out what happened exactly on the little monitor, but when I saw this flash go through my screen on my monitor, I looked up and that's when I saw him hit. So then you knew it was real.
Off-duty police officers Todd Bryant and Joe Dana were working security 20 feet from the ring when Owen hit the mat, and they started to check on him. And eventually Lawler makes his way over and puts his hand over Owen's mouth and says he's not breathing. And they use some scissors to cut his mask off and start chest compressions through his outfit. It's just, God dog, this is hard to get through.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it was terrible. I mean, again, maybe Lawler and I we were in a tough spot, as we say, but poor us. I could only imagine, again, we talked earlier about how it was backstage. At least we had a little bit of sanity in our little area, our little few feet there together. So, it is hard to get through. This whole damn thing's hard to get through because of the nature of it. But people are hearing things about this from a perspective that I promise you've never heard before. Not from me.
Right. They say that he still had a heartbeat, but it was known as the dying heart rhythm, meaning he had yet to flatline, and they're trying to administer medicine or shots to raise the heart rate, but no response. His eyes are still fixed and dilated, and they're going to put him in, the spinal column and all that stuff. And then eventually the ambulance. And when he finally arrives to the Truman Medical Center, just 3 miles away, they administer something into the air tube and they hook him up to an IV, and they decide that he's already clinically dead here. Golly, man, this is just rough to think that this is where it is. At 8:07, they're trying, their last efforts. And then at 8:12, that's where they call it. And, he's gone. And I think most people know this, but Bret Hart was actually, on a flight to LA coming through Toronto. So he's on a plane when this happens, and someone hands him a note that says, "Please call home, family emergency." And, when he finally gets through, Carlos says, "Are you sitting down?" He says, "Of course, I'm on a plane."
Jeez.
And he says that Owen passed. Did Did you ever talk to Brett about losing Owen?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I was respectful of the family then and now. And it was so crazy, Conrad. I didn't know what was appropriate. What is the protocol for something like this, other than to express yourself that you're really, that you care. What can I do? And I'm sorry. But what can you really do? So I kind of laid off of that matter. But today I will say the good news of that is that Brett and I are great friends, and he knows I had nothing to do with his Montreal bullshit, and he also knows that I care for the family. So, but we never really talked about it a lot. When we get together sometimes and Owen's name comes up, Conrad, I think it's a defense mechanism for both Brett and me to some degree. He may disagree with this, but my assumption. For me, it's true. We both had rather invest our time and our conversation in laughing about some of his ribs.
Right.
He did some of the greatest ribs in history, especially like with his dad. He ribbed his dad as hard as anybody else. And he loved to tell those stories. So, but that's kind of what we talk about. So, but we talked, and it was good to do that. I mean, we needed to do it, and it's just all so. I look back, I'm trying to think of good things to say here, and it's like every time I turn my head, I get the shit slapped out of me here. So it's challenging, man.
Let's talk about the next night. They decided to do a tribute show to Owen, and Martha was critical of that. She said Vince followed through with a Monday Night Raw's horse show scheduled for St. Louis rather than postpone or cancel the show, giving his wrestlers time to cope with the loss of their friend and colleague. He used Owen's death as a golden opportunity to bolster ratings in a highly contested viewership battle. He transformed the show at the Kiel Center into a tribute card for Owen, and wrestlers stood with tears in their eyes for a 10-bell salute to open the evening. The matches were short and devoid of risque behaviors or angles of any sort. And throughout the show, wrestlers and staff spoke of their favorite memories of Owen in pre-taped segments that aired regularly between bouts. Never once have I questioned the profound sadness and loss most of the wrestlers felt in the days and weeks that followed Owen's death. In fact, some, like Jeff Jarrett, continue to stay in touch with me and show their support and respect to Owen to this day. This business is cold, callous, selfish, self-serving, and unrealistic, Jarrett said in his emotional tribute. It's a fantasy world. He did what he did with integrity, and integrity in this business is few and far between. And she would say that most spoke about his pranks, and that endeared him to everyone. And she says perhaps the most touching words came from Jim Ross, who said he hoped he could be as good of a man as Owen so I can see him again someday.
God. Well, it just turns my gut. Yeah, I remember saying that. And that's another one of those deals where it was like Kevin Dunn comes on and says, JR, we want you and King to say something about Owen. Because, we kind of sat in that chair, the night before. So, of course, what are we going to say? Of course. So we do something, what we're doing, comes on camera. And again, it's one of those situations, man, where you just let your heart and your instincts take over. I didn't write nothing down, didn't try to rhyme anything. I didn't want to be cool. Here's the deal. And I believe that. I believe that Owen Hart was as good a man that I ever met in this business. As a human being, a father, a brother, everything good, man. Everything was good about this guy. Everything. And I just knew that if somewhere in my lifetime that I could raise my game up to his level, I knew where I would be at the end of the day. When as Bobby Heenan would say, when I took that final dirt nap for old JR, we know where he's headed. And that's what I saw with Owen. We knew Owen was in a better place, and depending on what your religion is, I'm not getting into all that because that started another firestorm for somebody looking for something to piss on. But he was, I believe that. I believe he was as good as a guy, and if I could be half the man or close to him, my afterlife would be very well spoken for.
I guess we should mention here, Owen's funeral was on the 31st of May in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. You attended, correct?
Nope. What was that day on? Do we have Raw?
Surely. Are you saying you didn't go because that was Raw?
I can tell you this in a nutshell. 1, I did not go to the funeral. 2, I regret it to this very day. And 3, there's something, it's something work oriented. And maybe I want to think it might've been the voiceovers.
No, you're exactly right. It was taped on the 25th and it aired on the 31st.
Yeah. And so Lawler and I, went to the studio at Stanford and did the voiceovers for Raw that night. And that's why we didn't go. I want to tell you something. Of all the regrettable things I've done in my professional lifetime, that's got to rank right there at the top. But you got this job you got, right? So I don't know how we could have done it. We're multitasking. And, I wasn't at the point of arguing. I wasn't at the point of making an issue. I was suffering like the family and his friends and his fans and everybody else. And quite frankly, for me, I've always found solitude and peace doing my work and being this play-by-play guy. And I'm thinking to you that I probably got some really good cathartic time because I got away from thinking totally about this tragedy to do the job that we had to do. Because, it's a different ballgame. You're in a studio doing voiceovers. It's more challenging. Time's very crucial. Can't miss this, can't miss that, because everything's already on tape. There's no fluctuation. So I didn't go to that funeral, and I regret it this very day. This very day. I wish I could have gone. But I couldn't, but my thoughts are there to a large degree, but I think it was cathartic to be able to stay back and do the show, because we talked about Owen on that show a little bit, obviously. So anyway, yeah, it wasn't a decision I would make today. Isn't it funny? We talked about a lot of things today about if it happened today, we might do it differently. Would we continue the pay-per-view? Probably not, at least in my view. And this is called GrillingJR. So JR says I probably would not have continued the show. That's my opinion. That's all. It's not an indictment on everybody in WWE that made. I'm going to throw McMahon on the bus. He'll be thrown on the bus ample times. He's thrown me on the bus. Who gives a shit?
Let me ask you about the decision to air clips of the funeral on Monday Night Raw. On the 31st, it is a taped Raw, but they show footage of WWF wrestlers walking into the funeral, and Martha would say, I made it clear he was not to include anything from the funeral on this show. I didn't want him to continue profiting in any way from Owen's death. That would be pretty low. And, they aired it. What'd you think of that decision?
Well, I didn't know that Martha had, allegedly, conversed with Vince with specific instructions to not air any of the funeral footage. And, here, look, I'm not trying to say I can understand where she's coming from, because I can't. She's his wife. She bore his 2 children. So I can't say, here's how she was feeling. How do you know? How do you know? So, but I never knew that conversation took place, Conrad. And so therefore, when the footage aired, I thought it was just exactly what we needed to have as far as an update was concerned. We can't go on a television show, I don't think. This is my opinion. I agree. I think Vince is right in this case about the news footage. Everybody else had it. Everybody else, meaning all these various news services around the world, were covering it and getting footage. And so his home audience that grew up watching him, and he grew up before their eyes, in essence, would be devoid of any coverage. It would be a disservice, in my opinion, to the audience at that point, not to follow up on as a news story about the funeral in Calgary. So I didn't have an issue with it, to be honest with you. Again, but I wasn't privy to any private conversations that Vince may or may not have had with Martha.
Well, I guess we should mention 3 weeks after Owen passed, Martha files a wrongful death lawsuit against the WWF, and it's settled out of court for a reported $18 million on November 2nd, 2000. And in December 2000, Martha created the Owen Hart Foundation and owenhartfoundation.org. And it's a charity that provides university and college scholarships for children in need, as well as housing for low income families. And the Owen Hart Foundation also supports a number of worthwhile charities in the Calgary community. And Martha said that she started the foundation to create a meaningful legacy for Owen, because she knew Owen would be happy that she was helping people in his name, especially in the area of education, as it was always very important to both of them. And something that was important to a lot of people is to remember Owen's memory in wrestling. And Martha was not always on board with that. When the WWE put a DVD out about Owen, Martha says, "My children and I were unaware of this project until May 7th, when it was brought to our attention by a friend who had read about it online. Contrary to your report, we do not back or support it in any way, nor has the WWE requested our backing or support. From what little we know of the project, it seems to be another attempt to exploit Owen's memory and his tragic death for commercial gain. We have resisted that kind of initiative for almost 16 years. If WWE really wanted to honor Owen's legacy, it would just let him rest in peace." And, talking about the Hall of Fame, which has obviously been something that has been a hot topic, Martha has said about Owen being in the WWE Hall of Fame, "I am firm in my belief that the WWE was responsible for Owen's death. And as a result, I cannot and will not support any efforts by the WWE to profit from Owen's memory. I want nothing to do with the WWE in any regard in relation to Owen or any other front. It is worth mentioning," this is me talking now, "it is worth mentioning Owen's in a ton of other Hall of Fames, like the Luthez Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame and all that." But
yep, he is.
But Mark Henry thinks that Owen should be in the WWE Hall of Fame. And he has been on record as saying that Owen brought him so much joy and he wishes he could be here. And he said during his speech, "And Martha, let that camera zoom in here, please. This is not from the company. This is not from the other wrestlers. This is from his other brother. He needs to be here. And I hate that I haven't kept up like I should have. I would love to be able to look down one day and see Oj able to be among us. This is his birthright." What say you, Jim? We haven't talked about this before. Should Owen be in the WWE Hall of Fame?
Well, of course. Absolutely. It's not even it shouldn't even be oh, no, I understand why you asked the question, but it's not it's not a hard question. This is my view. He earned that opportunity. He brought joy and smiles and tears and laughter and shock and awe to fans all over the world for a long time. And he had a huge fan base. People loved him. And when you met Owen, you couldn't help but love him. So for him not to have the opportunity to be enshrined in the WWE Hall of Fame, where he didn't get all of his fame there, but let's be honest, the majority of it, it's a no-brainer. So I think what it does, look, I understand the part of Martha that's grieving. I've grieved myself lately. But at some point in time, you can't, this grieving process is a strange cat, man. And one person can't dictate how everybody else grieves. I can promise you. So I think that Martha's being a little selfish at sometimes. And that's cold to say. God, JR, she's a widow. She's got 2 kids to raise. I'm sorry if that comes off bad, and I'm apologizing now. But it just seems to me on the surface, okay, look, you filed this lawsuit, justifiably so, and you won it, and you got, somewhere in the $18 million range before attorney fees. Let's not get past that. And so that's been settled. In the process of doing that, it imploded within the family, which was totally unnecessary, because it was never a point where it didn't seem like Martha was really willing at times to move on. But again, she was grieving. And I can promise you that process there's no manual for it, and no predictability to how you grieve. So I just think that she might have been unfair to the fans who loved him, who bought tickets to see him, who helped him earn a great living for a long time, but who really had an emotional investment in the character. And the character was the real guy.
there's a lot we could talk about, with the lawsuits and the back and forth and the settlements and Jerry McDevitt's comments about the right to sell DVDs, or in the end, none of it's going to bring back Owen. None of it's going to right what happened. Let's wrap up today's episode with, a fun story. I'm sure you've got dozens. Give us a funny one about a funny prank or a rib, or share with us one of the lighter moments of Owen.
I had more than one occasion, this is a particular occasion, to need to bring somebody into my little talent relations office at the arena, on a Raw or SmackDown, whatever. Normally what that office meant is I got a small dressing room, locker room, and some of the talents were dressing there from time to time, some more tenured guys. And I enjoyed the company. When I needed to have a meeting with talent, they left, and so forth. So I'm getting ready to have this meeting with this guy. And allegedly, he had been using cocaine. And so I mentioned to somebody, I got to talk to, maybe, I don't remember who it was. I got to talk so-and-so today. I got a little issue. Somehow Owen got word that I was going to have a talk with wrestler blank about alleged cocaine use. So I'm walking down the hall to go to catering to find the guy, bring him back to my office. And here comes Owen. He's staggering and bouncing off the walls like he's drunk, because he would have no earthly idea how he would feel if he was on cocaine, because he never did it. And he didn't realize cocaine takes you the other way and not the down way. He went north with it, not south. Then closer I got to him, I looked at him. He had gone to the dessert stand at the catering and got him a powdered donut. He took that powder, that sugar, and put it all over his nose and upper lip. So he said, then he looked at me and said, "I heard you're having a bad day." I said, "Well, it's better now." But things like that were good, little things. We were on a Bruise cruise or some cruise one time. And I think I had the original George Costanza scene where there was shrinkage. And I was in a pool with these big ass swim trunks on, not only because of my big ass, but because it just made me look slimmer, I thought. But that's it. So I don't know where he is. You never know about him. So we're talking, wives are there, the kids. All of a sudden, my pants are down on my feet, my swimsuit. And little Jimmy ain't looking so good. And he laughed his ass off. That was the funniest thing in the world. And I couldn't chase him because my pants around my ankles. All I want to do is get my damn pants up, my swimsuit up, and cover up the shortcomings. But nonetheless, he was an equal opportunity ribber. No one was immune. Brett got it. Stu got it. His buddies got it. Everybody got it. But it was a beautiful way. It's a beautiful way. So that's what I remember. He made so many people laugh. And when you're on the road that much, Conrad, and you're away from your family, as much as these cats are, and you're in a very fragile business. Am I over, brother, or am I not over? When do I get my push? Blah blah blah. Those lighter moments in a locker room, or on an airplane, or a charter, or a tour bus, or whatever it may be, are invaluable. And that's what you got out of Owen Hart. He kept everybody upbeat, happy, positive, and he was a great listener. Nobody's ever talked about that very much. He was one of the best listeners because he gave a shit. He cared about you and how you were feeling. So he was a great listener. He paid attention. And I've never seen anybody, I think he's way far ahead of his time as an in-ring performer. But he had that Mexican style. He could utilize the Latino style. He was great in Japan. He didn't just experience these styles. He was a little bit like Jericho. And I think Jericho may have followed the lead there a little bit, because not only has Jericho gotten experience in all these different styles, lucha libre or the Japanese or whatever it may be. Well, and Jericho has become really, really good at all those. Well, Owen mastered those before almost anybody else. There's a small little group that would have the same experiences. Eddie Guerrero was one of them. Benoit was one of them. But nobody got great at all those disciplines as great as Owen Hart did. That was a precedent setter. And any young wrestler, any young fan, especially some young talents looking for somebody to watch on a road trip, on your device, whatever it may be, check him out, man. He'll teach you so much, and even though you've never met him, and he probably never will until the hereafter.
One of the all-time greats, and it's unfortunate that we lost him 20 years ago today. Today was a tough episode, and I hope we don't do too many of these, but I felt like it needed to be done.
Yep.
Nobody's really talked about this show, and nobody's really talked about Owen in his final moments, and it's been written about. JR was ringside. It felt like an opportunity to pay tribute to one of the all-time greats, Owen Hart. So stop what you're doing this weekend and go fire up some Owen Hart matches. There's tons of that on the network for you to enjoy and relive some of the happier times. And we'll be back next week with something a little different. Next week will be a lot more lighthearted. We're going to have something unique, Jim. What came in second in our poll this week was Capital Combat. So talk about a departure. We're going to be talking about RoboCop next week.
Well, that certainly isn't as serious as what we talked about here today, folks. I can promise you. So if we've taken you down a dark hole here, telling you the truth about something that really happened, next week will be a little different ball game because RoboCop. One of my great lines that night. My God, Bob, it's RoboCop. Bob Cottle said to me, "How the hell are we going to call this?" I said, "I don't have any idea." But that was a great classic deal. We'll talk about it next week in the detail, where the opportunity came up to promote RoboCop's movie. How are you going to do it? And they came up with him being in a goddamn match. Are you kidding me? And I do believe to this very day, it was a little bit of the KGO Ole Anderson taking a sharp stick and sticking it right up the backside of WCW brass, because there was no way. I'll close with this. I apologize for my language and start here. You can't shine shit. And RoboCop was shit.
It was shit. And we'll be back next week right here to talk a little RoboCop. Who booked this shit?
What?